Hello, I'm Arthur Reed. Welcome to the World War II History Channel, where we explore the pivotal moments and untold stories of the greatest generation. In the soft twilight of ordinary days, a faint shadow began to stretch across the horizon, brushing against hearts before it touched the world. There was a time when the light still felt steady in the windows of small towns and quiet streets. People went about their mornings in the usual way, pouring tea, folding letters, and pausing at doorways to say gentle goodbyes. Yet in the spaces between those ordinary moments, something new and uncertain began to settle like a thin mist. It was not loud or sudden. It came in the form of quiet conversations that stopped when certain neighbors passed by, and in the way some eyes looked away a little sooner than before. Consider a doctor in a modest clinic, the kind of man who had spent years listening to the small complaints of his patients with patient hands and a steady voice. He noticed, one afternoon, that his older colleague spoke of certain people differently now, as if some lives had quietly become less visible in the room. The younger doctor felt a private stirring inside his chest, a gentle unease he could not quite name. He said nothing at first. Instead, he stayed a little longer with each person who came to see him, letting his fingers rest a moment longer on a wrist, offering a soft word about the weather or a child's drawing pinned to the wall. These were small kindnesses, the kind that cost nothing yet held something precious inside them. He wrote a short letter to his sister that evening, the paper smooth under his pen, and he told her only that the days felt a little heavier lately, nothing more. He folded it carefully, as if the fold itself could keep the worry from escaping. Not far away, in a narrow house with lace curtains, a mother sat at her kitchen table after the children had gone to bed. She held a fountain pen and wrote to her son who had moved to the city for work. Her handwriting was careful and looping, the way it had always been. She wrote about the garden, about how the roses were still blooming even though the air carried a new chill in the evenings. She did not write about the posters she had seen or the way some shopkeepers now spoke in lower voices. Instead, she wrote that she hoped he was eating well and that she kept a light on for him in the hallway, the same light she had always kept. When she sealed the envelope, she pressed it to her cheek for a moment, as if the paper could carry a little of her warmth across the distance. In the quiet of the kitchen, she felt both the fear she could not name and the quiet strength that came from simply continuing to love in the old way. There were neighbors too, people who had shared bread and stories for years. One evening an older woman brought a small pot of soup to the family next door, the way she always had on Thursdays. She knocked softly, and when the door opened she smiled the same gentle smile she had always worn. They spoke of the weather and of the children's schoolwork. They did not speak of the new rules that had begun to appear like faint writing on the walls of the town. Yet in the sharing of the warm soup and the lingering at the doorway, something passed between them that no new rule could easily touch. It was the simple act of one hand offering warmth to another, a small light that refused to go out. These were the days when the horizon still held both light and shadow side by side. People felt the change in the air the way one feels the first cool breath before a storm, yet many chose, in the privacy of their own hearts, to keep tending to what was kind and true. A teacher continued to read stories aloud to her class, her voice steady even when some pages seemed to carry new meanings. A shopkeeper still wrapped parcels with extra care for those who looked tired. These moments were not grand or loud. They lived in the space between one breath and the next, and the way a person chose to look another in the eye and see a fellow human rather than a stranger. And so the shadows lengthened slowly, like the long fingers of evening across a familiar room. Yet inside those lengthening shadows, small lights continued to flicker. Letters were still written with care. Hands still reached out with soup or a steady touch. Hearts still held quiet rooms where fear and love could sit together without one driving the other away. It was in these ordinary rooms, in these quiet choices, that the truest story of those days began to be written, not in bold letters but in the soft, persistent language of everyday courage. In remembering these gentle beginnings, when ordinary people still reached for the light even as the horizon darkened, we honor the quiet resilience that lived in so many hearts. Just as those small acts of kindness helped keep humanity alive in uncertain times, you might find comfort in holding a piece of history close to remember the courage that persisted across the wider war. On Amazon, there are beautiful WW2 memorabilia items and the film Midway available on Prime, stories that show bravery and human spirit in another part of the world, helping us feel connected to the strength of those who came before. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. And now, as the night deepens around you, let these quiet stories settle softly in your thoughts. Picture the warm light in a hallway, the careful fold of a letter, the gentle offering of a hand. These small lights still shine, even across the years. Rest easy knowing that the human heart has always found ways to keep a little warmth alive, no matter how long the shadows grow. Sleep well, carried by the gentle rhythm of these memories. Behind the first strands of wire that rose against the sky, the world grew smaller, and hearts began to speak in whispers that only the night could hear. There, in the quiet stretch of earth that had once been open fields, new lines appeared, thin and straight at first, then taller, closing in around the people who arrived with bundles in their arms and questions in their eyes. The air felt different here, heavier somehow, though the wind still moved through the grass beyond the fence. People stepped down from trains or trucks and stood for a moment, looking at the wire as if it were a strange new horizon they had not expected. Mothers held their children closer. Fathers kept their hands on shoulders, steady and warm. No one spoke loudly. The voices stayed low, like secrets passed from one hand to another. A woman with a small child in her arms walked slowly along the edge of the gathering crowd. She whispered to the little one, soft words about home and the garden they had left behind, about how they would find a way to make this new place feel a little like the old one. Her voice trembled only once, when she said the name of someone they had lost along the way. She pressed her cheek against the child's hair and breathed in the familiar scent, letting it steady her. Around them, others moved in the same quiet way. A man helped an older woman carry a worn suitcase, his hand steady under the handle even though his own shoulders felt heavy. They did not know each other's names, yet in that small moment their eyes met and something gentle passed between them, a shared understanding that needed no words. Inside the first rough buildings, the air grew close and warm from many bodies. People found spaces on wooden platforms or thin mattresses. A young man sat with his back against the wall, his knees drawn up, and thought of the letter he wished he could write. In his mind he saw the paper, the careful lines of his handwriting, the way he would tell his sister that he was safe for now and that he kept her picture in his pocket. He could not send the letter, not yet, but the thought of writing it gave his hands something gentle to do. He traced the shape of her name in the air, once, twice, until the motion calmed the quiet fear that lived just beneath his ribs. Night came early behind the wire. The sky still held a little light, but the fences cast long shadows across the ground. In the darkness, whispers began to rise like soft threads weaving through the air. A mother in one corner told her daughter a story about a brave little bird that always found its way home. Her voice was low and steady, the same voice she had used at bedtime for years. The child listened, eyes half closed, one small hand curled around her mother's finger. Nearby, two strangers shared a crust of bread they had saved from the day. They broke it carefully, each taking a piece no larger than the others, and ate in silence. The simple act of dividing what little they had felt like a small light in the gathering dark. There were moments when the fear rose like a wave inside a chest, when the unknown pressed close and the heart beat faster in the quiet. A man lay awake listening to the breathing of the others around him and wondered about his wife and the home they had shared. He pictured the window where she used to stand in the mornings, the way the light fell across the table. The memory brought both comfort and a gentle ache. Yet even in that ache, something resilient stirred. He reached out in the darkness and found the hand of the man sleeping nearby. He did not squeeze hard, only rested his fingers there for a moment, a quiet reminder that they were not entirely alone. The other hand responded with the smallest pressure, and for a little while the night felt less wide and empty. Letters lived in many hearts even when they could not be written on paper. People carried them inside, folded carefully in memory. A grandmother thought of the words she would send to her grandchildren if she could, words about patience and the way flowers still bloom after hard winters. She whispered them to herself in the dark, letting the rhythm of the old phrases soothe her. A young woman imagined writing to her brother, telling him she was keeping her strength for both of them. These imagined letters became small acts of everyday heroism, ways of holding on to love when everything else felt uncertain. In the shared spaces between the wires, kindness moved quietly from one person to another. Someone offered a corner of their blanket to a shivering stranger. Another helped steady an elderly man who stumbled in the low light. These gestures were small, almost invisible, yet they carried the weight of something larger. They said, without speaking, that even here the heart could still choose to reach outward. The wire itself seemed to hum sometimes in the wind, a soft sound that mixed with the whispers and the breathing of many people trying to rest. Above it all, the stars still shone, the same stars that watched over homes far away. And so the first nights passed in this new place of wire and sky. Fears lived there, private and tender, but they shared the space with quiet courage and the gentle persistence of human connection. People learned to speak in lowered voices, to offer warmth with a glance or a shared piece of bread, to carry whole letters inside their chests when paper was not possible. These were the fragile beginnings, the first soft threads of resilience that would continue to weave through the days and nights ahead. In these early whispers behind the wire, we see how even in the narrowest spaces, hearts found ways to stay open and kind. Those hidden moments of quiet strength and unseen human connection remind us of the raw, uncensored truths of that time, the ones that live in personal stories rather than in what was shown openly. To help you feel closer to those deeper, more personal layers of history that are often kept from view, there is a special collection available on Gumroad with unseen, raw images and videos from the war, too restricted for most platforms, offering a more intimate window into the realities people endured and the quiet ways they held on. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As you rest now, let these gentle whispers settle softly around you. Picture the steady hand offering bread, the low voice telling a story in the dark, the imagined letter folded with care inside a heart. These small lights still glow across the years. Carry them with you into sleep, knowing that even behind the thinnest wires, the human spirit found ways to speak softly and keep kindness alive. Sleep peacefully, held by the quiet rhythm of these enduring stories. As the first careful calculations began in rooms set apart from the main paths, a quiet chill touched the edges of what had once felt ordinary. There, where white coats still moved through hallways that smelled faintly of soap and old wood, something new began to settle into the air like the first cold breath before winter. It was not spoken of loudly. It arrived in the form of folded papers passed from one hand to another, in the way certain names were read in lower voices, and in the subtle shift of eyes that no longer met as easily as they once had. Doctors who had spent years listening to the rhythms of breathing and the stories behind each pulse now felt a different kind of weight in their hands. The stethoscope still rested against skin with the same gentle pressure, yet the questions asked afterward carried a new distance. A young doctor stood at the end of a narrow corridor one evening, his fingers resting on the cool metal of a door handle. He had been asked to observe more closely, to note things he had never been asked to note before. In the quiet of that moment he felt a private stirring inside his chest, a gentle unease that had no clear name. He thought of the patients he had tended for months, the way some had shared small stories of home during long nights of discomfort. He remembered the way one elderly man had smiled faintly when handed an extra blanket. Now the same hands that had offered that blanket hesitated at the threshold of something new. He stepped inside anyway, because the path had already narrowed, but he lingered a little longer with each person, letting his voice stay soft and his touch remain careful. These were small choices, the kind that lived in the space between one breath and the next. Not far from those rooms, behind the first fences that marked the edges of the camps, people waited in lines that moved slowly under an open sky. A woman with a child at her side felt the air grow cooler as the afternoon lengthened. She had been told to step forward with others whose names had been called in the same quiet way. Inside her, a private fear unfolded like a letter she could not quite read. She held her child's hand tighter, feeling the small warmth of those fingers, and whispered words that were more breath than sound. She spoke of the sky above them, of how it still stretched wide and blue even here. The child leaned against her leg, and for a moment the fear softened into something quieter, something that could be carried. In the shared spaces where people rested after long days, small kindnesses continued to move from one person to another like threads of light. An older man offered his portion of warmth to a younger one who shivered in the evening air. He did not speak of why he did it. He simply unfolded the thin covering and placed it across the other's shoulders with hands that had once worked in fields and gardens. The younger man accepted it without words, yet his eyes held a quiet gratitude that needed no explanation. Nearby, two women sat close together on a rough bench. One had been chosen for the same quiet observation as the other. They did not know each other's full stories, yet they shared the simple comfort of sitting side by side while the light faded. One reached out and brushed a strand of hair from the other's face, a gesture so gentle it could have belonged to any ordinary evening in any ordinary home. Letters lived in many minds during those first uncertain days. A man lay on his side in the dim light and traced the shape of words he wished he could send. In his thoughts he wrote to his sister about the way the morning still began with the sound of birds beyond the wire, about how he kept her last letter folded carefully against his heart. He could not post the words he imagined, but the act of forming them inside himself brought a small steadiness to his breathing. He pictured her reading them by a window, the paper smooth under her fingers, and that image helped the private fear settle into something he could hold without letting it overwhelm him. The cold calculus moved slowly at first, like frost forming on a window pane. It asked for observations and notes that felt different from the healing work that had come before. Some who wore the white coats felt their own hearts grow heavier with each new request. They still washed their hands in the same basins, still listened for the steady beat beneath skin, yet they carried an inner question that followed them into the quiet hours. One doctor sat alone after the others had gone, his head bowed over a sheet of paper that held only a few lines. He wrote nothing about the new tasks. Instead, he wrote a single sentence about the way a patient had thanked him that afternoon, the words simple and true. He folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket, a small act of remembering what still mattered. In the evenings, when the light grew soft and the fences stood dark against the sky, whispers of resilience rose in the shared rooms. A woman who had been selected spoke softly to the person beside her, telling a story from her childhood about a garden that bloomed even after hard rains. Her voice stayed low and steady, the same voice she had once used to comfort her own children. The listener closed her eyes and let the words wrap around her like a familiar blanket. In that moment the cold outside seemed a little farther away. Another person offered a sip of water from a shared cup, holding it carefully so none would spill. These everyday gestures became quiet acts of heroism, ways of saying without words that even when the world asked for something colder, the heart could still choose warmth. The horizon of what was possible began to shift, yet inside that shift many continued to reach for the small lights they could still see. A hand placed gently on a shoulder. A story told in the dark. A memory of home held close like a letter that could never be sent. These moments did not stop the larger changes, but they kept something human alive in the spaces between them. They reminded those who experienced them that dignity could still be offered, one quiet choice at a time. These early moments, when the first careful weighings began and some still held tightly to what was kind and true, show us how precious every small light becomes when shadows lengthen. Keeping these tender human stories alive requires time, care, and deep research so they can be told with the gentleness they deserve. If these quiet histories have touched you, a small tip on Ko-Fi, even as little as $1, helps support the heart and hours poured into crafting them so they can continue to reach others. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As the night deepens around you now, let these gentle stories rest softly in your thoughts. Picture the steady hand offering warmth, the low voice sharing a memory, the imagined letter folded with care. These small lights still shine across the years. Carry them with you into sleep, knowing that even when cold calculations began, the human heart found quiet ways to keep kindness alive. Sleep peacefully, held by the soft rhythm of these enduring moments. In rooms where the air itself began to change, the echoes of quiet courage rose like gentle breaths that refused to be silenced. There, in the place known for its first careful tests on how far the body could reach, people were brought one by one into spaces that felt different from the rest of the camp. The wall stood plain and close. The light fell in a steady way that made every shadow seem longer. Those who entered carried with them the same private thoughts that had traveled with them from home. A man stepped inside and felt the door close softly behind him. He thought of the letter he had once held from his wife, the paper now worn thin from being unfolded and folded again in the quiet hours. He pictured her handwriting, the way she used to sign her name with a small loop at the end. That image stayed with him even as the air around him began to feel lighter, thinner, as though the room itself were slowly lifting away from the earth. Outside, in the shared barracks, others waited and listened. They could not see what happened inside, yet they knew when someone had been taken to the special rooms. A woman sat on the edge of a wooden platform, her hands resting in her lap. She thought of the young man who had gone that morning, how he had smiled faintly before leaving, as if to say he would return. She kept a small piece of bread saved from her own portion, wrapped carefully in a corner of cloth. When he came back later, pale and quiet, she placed it in his hand without a word. Their fingers touched for a moment, and that small warmth passed between them like a secret they both understood. He ate slowly, and she stayed beside him, her presence a quiet promise that he was not alone in whatever had happened. The body remembered things the mind tried to set aside. Another prisoner lay afterward on his thin mattress and felt the ache in his chest ease little by little. He turned his thoughts to the fields he had once walked, the way the wind moved through the tall grass on summer evenings. In his memory the air was full and rich, carrying the scent of earth and growing things. He breathed in time with that remembered wind, letting it steady the rhythm inside him. When a fellow inmate brought a cup of water, he accepted it with both hands, holding the warmth of the cup against his palms before drinking. The simple act of receiving and the simple act of giving wove a small thread of kindness through the long evening. These moments lived in the spaces between the tests. People learned to watch for one another with new gentleness. A young woman who had been through the room earlier in the week noticed when another was chosen. She stepped closer in the line and spoke in a voice so low it was almost lost in the air. She said only that the sky still looked the same afterward, that the stars still came out at night. It was a small thing, yet the other woman held those words like a folded letter she could carry inside her pocket. Later, when the night grew deep and the barracks settled into quiet breathing, the two sat near each other. One reached out and rested her hand lightly on the other's shoulder, a touch that said more than any louder voice could have managed. Letters continued to live in hearts even when they could not be written on paper. A man traced the shape of his daughter's name in the air with one finger while he waited. He imagined telling her that he was thinking of the stories he used to read to her at bedtime, the ones about brave little animals who always found their way home. The memory of her small face listening, eyes wide and trusting, gave him a place to rest his thoughts when the present felt too narrow. He kept that image close, the way others kept actual letters pressed against their skin. In the quiet after the rooms, he shared a corner of his blanket with the person next to him, tucking it carefully so both could feel a little of its thin warmth. The echoes of those days stayed long after the air had returned to its usual weight. People spoke of them in the softest voices, not to dwell on what had been done, but to honor the way they had held one another through it. A hand offered in the dark. A story told in a whisper. A piece of bread saved and given. These were the everyday acts of heroism that lived alongside the tests, small lights that refused to go out even when the world around them asked for something colder. The body endured because the heart still found ways to reach outward. The spirit stayed steady because memory and kindness wove together like threads that no test could fully break. In the long nights that followed, when sleep came slowly, many lay awake listening to the breathing of those around them. They carried the echoes inside themselves, the memory of thin air and steady hands, of quiet words and shared warmth. These personal stories of resilience and gentle connection remind us how deeply human experiences can hide in plain sight, waiting to be understood more fully. For those who wish to explore these hidden layers with greater depth and community, the Patreon offers free podcasts, raw and unblurred video sections, and a place to connect with others who care about keeping these quiet histories alive through open conversation and deeper dives. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As you rest now in the gentle dark, let these echoes settle softly around you. Picture the careful hand offering bread, the low voice speaking of stars, the imagined letter folded with love. These small lights of quiet courage still shine across the years. Carry them with you into sleep, knowing that even in the thinnest air, the human heart found ways to keep kindness and memory alive. Sleep peacefully, held by the soft rhythm of these enduring stories. In chambers where the frost settled like a soft veil over skin and breath, the mind reached back toward the fires that once warmed the heart. There, in the quiet spaces set apart for the cold tests, the air grew sharp and still. People were brought in with the same gentle uncertainty that had followed them through every new place. The walls stood bare, and the light felt thinner, as though even the warmth of the sun had been asked to stay outside. A man stepped forward and felt the chill touch his face first, like a quiet whisper against his cheek. He closed his eyes for a moment and pictured the small stove in the corner of his childhood home, the way the flames used to dance behind the glass and send soft orange light across the floor. That memory stayed with him as the cold began to press closer, wrapping around his arms and legs like a second, colder skin. He thought of his sister sitting by that stove on winter evenings, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, telling stories that made the room feel larger than it was. The image brought a small steadiness to his breathing even as his body began to tremble. He kept the picture steady in his mind, letting the remembered warmth push back against the present chill. When the test ended and he was helped out, another prisoner was waiting nearby with a thin blanket already unfolded. The other man placed it around his shoulders without speaking, his hands moving with careful kindness. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and in that glance passed the quiet understanding that they had both walked through the same frost and returned. In the barracks afterward, the cold lingered in the bones like a memory that would not quite fade. People gathered close on the wooden platforms, sharing what little warmth they could offer one another. A woman sat with her back against the wall and felt the shiver that still ran through her arms. She reached for the hand of the person beside her, not to speak of what had happened but simply to feel another living warmth. The hand closed gently around hers, and for a little while the frost seemed farther away. She thought of the letters she had once written to her husband, the ones filled with news of the garden and the children's laughter. Even though she could not write new ones now, she carried the old words inside her like a small fire that no cold could fully extinguish. Another prisoner lay on his side, eyes open in the dim light, and let his thoughts drift to the fireplace in the home he had left behind. He remembered the smell of wood smoke and the way his mother used to hum softly while stirring a pot over the flames. The memory wrapped around him like an invisible blanket, softening the edges of the ache that remained in his muscles. When a fellow inmate brought a small cup of warm liquid later that evening, he accepted it with both hands, holding it close to his chest before drinking. The warmth traveled slowly inward, and he nodded his thanks with a quiet look that said more than any words could carry. These small acts of comfort became the quiet heroism of those days. Someone saved a corner of their own covering and draped it over another who still shivered. Someone else told a gentle story in a low voice, the kind of story that had once been told by firesides, about animals that found shelter in the snow and friends who stayed close through the longest nights. The listener closed her eyes and let the words become a small light inside the cold that still lived in her body. In the sharing of warmth, in the offering of a story or a hand, the frost lost some of its power to isolate. Letters continued to live in the quiet spaces of the heart. A young woman traced the shape of her mother's name in the air with one finger while she waited for sleep to come. She imagined writing about the way the cold had felt and how she had thought of the old wool blanket that used to cover her bed at home. She pictured her mother reading the letter by the window, the paper held close to catch the light, and that image brought a soft comfort that helped the night pass more gently. Others carried similar imagined letters, folded carefully in memory, filled with the ordinary details of love that no test could reach. The frost came and went in waves, yet the inner warmth that people carried with them remained steady. It lived in the small kindnesses passed from one hand to another, in the memories of home fires that flickered behind closed eyes, and in the quiet resilience that allowed a person to offer comfort even when their own body still ached from the cold. These were not grand gestures but the everyday acts of holding on, of reaching out, of keeping the light of human connection alive in the narrowest spaces. In the long evenings that followed each test, when the barracks settled into the soft rhythm of breathing, many lay awake and let their thoughts return to the fires they had once known. They remembered the crackle of wood, the warmth on their faces, the feeling of safety that came from being near people who loved them. These memories became quiet anchors, holding them steady when the present felt too sharp and cold. And in the sharing of those memories, in the gentle touch of a hand or the low voice of a story, the frost began to feel like something that could be endured together. These frosted veils of endurance and the quiet warmth people found within themselves and with one another remind us of the hidden, personal stories of resilience that lived alongside the larger events of the war. For more on the forgotten operations and the secret acts of courage that shaped those years, you can receive the free ebook The Shadow War. 5 top secret operations that shaped World War II along with weekly deep dives straight to your inbox. It is a gentle way to explore the quieter sides of history that often go unseen. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As you rest now in the gentle dark, let these memories of inner fires and shared warmth settle softly around you. Picture the careful hand offering a blanket, the low voice telling a story by an imagined hearth, the letter folded with love inside a quiet heart. These small lights still glow across the years. Carry them with you into sleep, knowing that even when frost gathered like a veil, the human spirit found quiet ways to keep kindness and memory alive. Sleep peacefully, held by the soft rhythm of these enduring stories. In the quiet shadows where fevers rose like hidden flames, the true light came from the gentle hands that stayed close through the night. There, in the long wooden buildings where many rested side by side, illness moved softly from one person to another like a quiet visitor that asked nothing yet took much. People woke in the early hours with a warmth that felt different from the sun, a heat that lived inside the skin and made every breath feel heavier. A woman opened her eyes and felt the familiar ache behind them, the kind that had visited her before in other places. She lay still for a moment, listening to the soft breathing of those around her, and let her thoughts drift to the small garden she had tended at home. She pictured the green leaves and the way the earth smelled after rain, and the memory brought a small steadiness even as her body grew restless with the hidden fire. She did not speak of the fever at first. Instead, she turned slightly and found the hand of the woman beside her already reaching out. That hand rested lightly on her forehead, cool and steady, and stayed there for a long while. No words were needed. The simple touch said that someone had noticed, that someone would stay close. Later, when the light outside had shifted, another prisoner brought a small cup of water. He held it carefully so none would spill, and helped her lift her head just enough to drink. The water felt like a small mercy against the dryness in her throat. She whispered a thank you that was more breath than sound, and he nodded once before moving on to check on someone else who also needed care. In the dim hours that followed, caregiving became the quiet work of many hands. A man who had been ill the week before now sat beside a younger prisoner whose fever had risen during the night. He dipped a cloth in cool water and placed it gently on the younger man's brow, the way his own mother had once done for him when he was a child. The motion was slow and careful, each press of the cloth a small act of everyday heroism. He spoke in a low voice about nothing in particular, the way the clouds had looked that morning, the sound of birds that still sang beyond the fences. The words were not important. What mattered was the steady presence, the reminder that even in the hidden grip of illness, one was not alone. Private fears lived quietly alongside the fever. A woman thought of her children far away and wondered if they were safe, if they remembered the songs she used to sing. The worry rose and fell with each wave of warmth that moved through her body. She kept a small piece of paper in her pocket, the last letter she had received before everything changed. She could not read it in the low light, but she knew the words by heart. They spoke of ordinary days and of love that waited. Holding that knowledge close helped the fear soften into something she could carry without letting it overwhelm her. Others found their own quiet anchors. A young man who felt the illness pulling at his strength turned his thoughts to the letters he wished he could write. In his mind he described the way the fever made the world feel far away, yet how the hand of a stranger had brought him back with a simple cup of water. He imagined his family reading those words by their own table, and the picture gave him a small hope that no fever could fully take. When another prisoner sat with him and shared a story from home, the hope grew a little stronger. The story was about a river that always found its way to the sea, no matter how many stones stood in its path. The young man listened and let the words become a gentle current inside his own tired body. These hidden melodies revealed the deepest kindness in the smallest gestures. Someone saved a corner of their own thin covering to place over another who shivered even in the heat of fever. Someone else stayed awake a little longer to make sure a neighbor's breathing stayed steady. These acts cost nothing yet carried the weight of something precious. They were the quiet resilience that lived in the barracks, the everyday courage of continuing to care even when one's own strength was low. The fevers came and went like passing shadows, yet the hands that reached out and the voices that spoke softly remained. In the long nights when sleep came slowly, many lay awake and listened to the soft sounds of caregiving around them. A cool cloth being wrung out. A low voice offering comfort. The rustle of someone moving carefully between the platforms to check on those who needed it most. These sounds became a kind of lullaby, a reminder that even in the hidden grip of illness, humanity still moved with gentleness. The private hopes that sustained people were simple ones: to see another morning, to feel a familiar hand, to carry the memory of love through whatever came next. These quiet stories of hidden illness and the gentle caregiving that rose in response remind us of the unseen heroes who kept light alive in the darkest places. In the same spirit of honoring courage across the wider war, you might find comfort in holding a piece of that history close through beautiful WW2 memorabilia or by watching the film Midway on Prime. Stories that capture quiet strength and human spirit in another part of the world. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As you rest now in the gentle dark, let these memories of cool hands and quiet hope settle softly around you. Picture the steady cloth on a fevered brow, the low voice telling a story of rivers, the imagined letter held close to the heart. These small lights of care still shine across the years. Carry them with you into sleep, knowing that even when hidden maladies moved through the camp, the human heart found quiet ways to keep kindness and hope alive. Sleep peacefully, held by the soft rhythm of these enduring stories. In the long wooden buildings where women walked the same paths and shared the same long nights, threads of sisterhood began to weave quietly between them, stronger than any fence. There, in the place set aside for women, the days moved with a different rhythm. The air carried the low voices of many who had been brought from different towns and different lives, yet something gentle began to grow between them. They learned each other's names in whispers and remembered small details, the way one hummed while working, the way another always saved a corner of her bread for someone who looked more tired. These small observations became the first threads, thin at first, then stronger as the weeks passed. A woman with a fresh wound on her leg sat on the edge of a wooden platform, her hands resting carefully on her knees. The pain came in waves, quiet and steady, yet she did not cry out. Beside her, another woman who had walked through the same quiet trial the week before sat close. She had brought a small piece of clean cloth she had kept hidden and folded for days. With gentle fingers she helped wrap the cloth around the wound, her touch light and steady, as if she were mending something precious rather than simply covering hurt. They did not speak of what had been done. Instead, the helper told a story in a low voice about her grandmother's garden, how the flowers always returned after the hardest winters. The listener closed her eyes and let the words become a small light against the ache. In the evenings, when the light faded and the barracks grew dim, the threads grew stronger. Women gathered in small groups, their heads close together. One passed a hidden message from someone in another block, a few lines written on a scrap of paper that had traveled through careful hands. Another read the words aloud in the softest whispers so everyone could hear news of a sister or a daughter still safe somewhere. The paper was then folded again and passed on, each woman adding her own quiet blessing before letting it go. These smuggled letters carried ordinary hopes and ordinary fears, yet in the sharing of them the women felt less alone. Private fears lived in many hearts. A young woman lay awake at night and thought of her mother, wondering if she knew where her daughter had been taken. The worry rose with each breath, yet when the woman beside her reached out and took her hand in the darkness, the fear softened. They lay side by side, fingers lightly linked, and the simple touch became a thread that held them both steady. In the morning the younger woman helped the older one rise, offering her arm as support without being asked. The older woman smiled faintly and whispered a thank you that carried the weight of many such mornings. Everyday heroism lived in these small choices. One woman who had recovered from her own wound spent extra time helping others who still struggled. She brought water, adjusted a blanket, or simply sat nearby so no one had to face the quiet hours alone. Another hid a small piece of bread in her sleeve and gave it later to someone whose strength had faded. These acts were done without expectation of return, yet they wove a net of care that held the entire group a little higher. When someone was taken for further quiet trials, the others watched with steady eyes and later gathered close to offer whatever comfort they could, a story, a touch, a shared memory of home. Letters continued to live even when paper was scarce. Women carried whole messages inside their hearts, words they would have written if they could. One imagined writing to her sister about the way the women here protected one another, how a gentle hand could make the hardest day feel a little softer. She pictured her sister reading those words by a window and feeling proud. The thought gave her a quiet strength that helped her rise each morning and offer her own small kindness in return. The threads of sisterhood grew in the spaces between the trials. They showed in the way women walked together when they could, and the low laughter that sometimes rose when someone told a gentle joke from before. They showed in the way one would stand slightly in front of another during difficult moments, a quiet shield made of presence alone. These bonds did not stop the larger hardships, yet they made the hardships bearable. They reminded every woman that even in the narrowest places, the heart could still reach outward and find another heart reaching back. In the long nights when sleep came slowly, many lay awake and felt the threads that connected them to the women sleeping nearby. They thought of the hands that had helped with wounds, the voices that had shared stories, the hidden letters that had traveled from one heart to another. These memories became anchors, holding them steady when the present felt too heavy. The sisterhood was not loud or grand. It lived in the smallest gestures, in the quiet decision to care for one another when the world asked for something colder. These threads of sisterhood and the hidden acts of care among women show the deeper, often unseen human stories that lived inside the harshest times. To feel closer to those raw and personal moments that are usually kept from view, there is a special collection on Gumroad with unseen, raw images and videos from the war, too restricted for most platforms, offering a more intimate window into the quiet strength and connections people held onto. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As you rest now in the gentle dark, let these threads of quiet care settle softly around you. Picture the steady hand wrapping a cloth, the low voice sharing a story of gardens, the hidden letter passed from one heart to another. These small lights of sisterhood still shine across the years. Carry them with you into sleep, knowing that even in the longest nights, women found ways to weave strength and kindness together. Sleep peacefully, held by the soft rhythm of these enduring bonds. In the quiet corners where Polish women carried hidden trowels on their legs, a gentle defiance began to grow, as soft and persistent as rabbits moving through the undergrowth at dusk. There, in the long barracks set aside for women, a group of Polish prisoners found one another through shared glances and small, careful words. They had been chosen for the same quiet work on their bodies, the kind that left wounds that needed tending in the dim light. Yet instead of letting the pain divide them, they began to weave a different kind of strength between them. One woman would sit beside another after the day's quiet trials and offer a steady hand to help adjust a blanket or a position that eased the ache. Their voices stayed low, almost like the wind moving through leaves, sharing stories of home or simple hopes for another morning. A young woman named in her own heart after the small creatures that moved unseen at night lay on her side and felt the familiar pull of discomfort along her leg. She thought of her mother's kitchen and the way bread smelled when it came warm from the oven. The memory brought a small steadiness. When another woman from the same group noticed the way she held her breath against the pain, she came closer and placed a cool cloth on her forehead without being asked. The touch was light and sure, the kind of care one sister might offer another in a quieter time. They did not speak of what had been done to them. Instead, the helper whispered a few lines of an old song her grandmother used to sing, the melody so soft it blended with the breathing of the others nearby. These women became known among themselves as the rabbits, not because they were small or afraid, but because they learned to move with quiet purpose, to slip messages and comfort from one to another when no one was watching. They found ways to document what was happening, using a camera that had been smuggled in with great care. One would hide the small device in the folds of her clothing, and another would stand watch while a third took the photographs that might one day speak for them. The act itself was a form of everyday heroism, done with steady hands and steady hearts even when fear lived close beneath the surface. Later, when the film was hidden away in a safe corner, the women felt a private sense of having kept a small piece of truth alive. Private fears still visited in the quiet hours. A woman would lie awake and wonder if her family knew she was still breathing, if they could feel her love reaching across the distance. The worry rose and fell like a gentle tide. Yet when morning came and she saw the faces of the others who had endured the same hidden trials, the fear softened into something she could carry. She would reach out and help one of them stand, offering her shoulder as support. The simple act of helping another stand became a quiet defiance against the isolation the trials tried to create. Letters lived in many hearts even when they could not be written on paper. One woman carried whole messages inside her, words she would have sent to her sister about the way the women here protected one another. She imagined describing how they shared the last crumbs of bread or stayed awake a little longer to make sure no one faced the darkness alone. The thought of her sister reading those words by a window gave her a small, steady warmth that helped her face another day. Others did the same, folding imagined letters of love and quiet courage into the quiet spaces of their minds. The threads of care grew stronger with each passing week. When one woman's wound needed tending, another would sit beside her and tell a gentle story from childhood, something about a river or a forest that always felt safe. The words became a kind of medicine, distracting from the ache while the hands worked carefully with whatever clean cloth could be found. These moments of mutual support were small acts of resistance, ways of saying without words that they would not let the trials take their humanity from them. They protected one another in the lines, making sure the weaker ones stood in the middle where they might be less noticed. They shared news from other blocks when it could be passed safely, keeping hope alive through the smallest connections. In the evenings, when the light faded, the rabbits gathered close in their corner of the barracks. They spoke in voices so low they were almost felt rather than heard. One would share a memory of her village, another would offer a piece of advice passed from her mother. These quiet exchanges wove a net of sisterhood that held them all a little higher. Even when the pain from the hidden trials lingered, the knowledge that they were not alone made the nights more bearable. Their defiance was not loud or bold. It lived in the decision to keep caring, to keep documenting, to keep the light of their shared strength burning softly in the dark. These quiet acts of defiance and the deep bonds of care among the rabbits show how even in the narrowest places, hearts can choose to reach outward and protect one another. Keeping these personal stories of gentle resistance alive takes time, heart, and careful research so they can be told with the tenderness they deserve. If these quiet histories have touched you, a small tip on Ko-Fi, even as little as $1, helps support the dedication poured into crafting them so more people can carry their light forward. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As you rest now in the gentle dark, let these threads of quiet defiance and sisterly care settle softly around you. Picture the steady hand offering comfort, the hidden camera passed between trusted fingers, the imagined letter folded with love. These small lights of resilience still shine across the years. Carry them with you into sleep, knowing that even when hidden trials came, the rabbits found ways to weave strength, care, and truth together. Sleep peacefully, held by the soft rhythm of these enduring stories. Where the long train slowed beneath an open sky and the gates stood wide, families stepped into a new unknown while holding tightly to one another and to hope. There, at the place called Auschwitz, the air felt different the moment feet touched the ground. People stepped down from the crowded cars carrying bundles and children, their eyes adjusting to the light that seemed both too bright and too heavy. Mothers kept their hands on small shoulders. Fathers stood close, their presence a quiet shield. No one knew exactly what waited ahead, yet in those first uncertain steps, small kindnesses began to appear like lights flickering in a sudden wind. A woman with a young child in her arms felt the press of the crowd around her and tightened her grip. The little one looked up with wide eyes, and she leaned down to whisper that everything would be all right, the same words she had used on ordinary mornings at home. Around them, strangers moved in the same careful way. An older man reached out to steady a woman who stumbled while carrying a worn suitcase. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and in that glance passed a silent understanding that they were all walking into something unknown together. The suitcase was lifted again, and the older man stayed close for a few steps more, as if his nearness could offer a small measure of protection. Private fears lived in many hearts during those first moments. A father thought of the home he had left behind, the garden he had tended, the letters he had once written to his brother. He pictured the familiar table where the family had gathered, and the memory brought both comfort and a gentle ache. He kept one hand on his daughter's back, feeling the warmth of her through the thin fabric of her coat. When the crowd shifted and they were separated for a moment, he called her name softly, the sound barely rising above the low murmur of many voices. She turned and reached for him, and the simple touch of their fingers steadied them both. In the midst of the movement and the uncertainty, everyday heroism showed itself in quiet ways. A young woman helped an elderly stranger adjust the bundle on her back, her hands gentle as she lifted the strap higher on the older woman's shoulder. She did not know the woman's name, yet the act of helping felt natural, as if they had always been neighbors. Nearby, a mother spoke softly to her son, telling him to stay close and to remember that she loved him, no matter what happened next. The boy nodded, his small face serious, and held her hand a little tighter. These small words and small touches became anchors in the shifting sea of faces and voices. Letters continued to live inside people even when they could not be written. One man carried in his mind the words he would have sent to his wife if he could have reached her. He imagined telling her about the white sky above the gates and how he was thinking of their kitchen and the way sunlight used to fall across the floor in the mornings. The thought of her reading those words gave him a small, steady strength that helped him keep his voice calm when he spoke to the child beside him. Others held similar imagined letters close, folded carefully in memory, filled with ordinary love and ordinary hope. The gates themselves seemed to mark a threshold between one world and another. People looked back at the trains that had brought them and then forward toward the buildings and the lines that were beginning to form. In those glances, a quiet resilience began to show. A family stayed together as long as they could, moving as one small unit through the crowd. When they were gently directed in different directions, they exchanged last looks that carried more than words could hold. A sister reached out and touched her brother's arm one final time, a gesture so small it might have gone unnoticed, yet it held the weight of everything they had shared. Small kindnesses continued to move through the chaos like threads of light. Someone offered a sip of water from a shared cup to a person who looked thirsty. Another helped lift a child who had grown too tired to walk. These acts were done without expectation, simply because the heart still knew how to reach outward even when everything else felt uncertain. The heroism lived in the choice to remain gentle, to offer comfort when comfort was all that could be given. In the long moments that followed the first arrival, many carried the memory of those gates inside them. They remembered the way hands had reached out in the crowd, the way voices had stayed soft, the way hope had flickered even in the unknown. These first experiences at the wide gates became part of the quiet stories people told themselves in the nights that came after. They spoke of the strength found in staying close, and protecting one another, and holding on to the small lights of human connection when the larger world felt vast and unfamiliar. These first moments at the gates, filled with fear and quiet hope, small kindnesses and everyday courage, remind us of the deeply personal stories that lived at the very beginning of the unknown. For those who wish to explore these hidden human arrivals and the quiet strength that emerged with greater depth and community, the Patreon offers free podcasts, raw and unblurred video sections, and a place to connect with others who care about keeping these tender histories alive through open conversation and deeper dives. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As you rest now in the gentle dark, let these memories of wide gates and reaching hands settle softly around you. Picture the careful touch on a shoulder, the whispered words of love, the imagined letter held close to the heart. These small lights of quiet resilience still shine across the years. Carry them with you into sleep, knowing that even at the threshold of the unknown, families and strangers found ways to hold on to hope and kindness. Sleep peacefully, held by the soft rhythm of these enduring stories. Where a pair of steady eyes first turned toward the twins and others with careful attention, a gentle unease settled like mist, yet small lights of connection still flickered. There, in the camp that had already become a place of many arrivals, a new presence moved among the lines and the barracks. He did not raise his voice or move with haste. Instead, he walked with a quiet purpose, his gaze resting longer on certain faces, especially those who came in pairs or carried the same features. Twins felt that gaze first, a sensation like a soft but persistent touch on the skin. A brother and sister stood close together, their hands linked without thinking. The sister felt her brother's fingers tighten slightly, and she answered with the same gentle pressure, a silent promise that they would stay near each other no matter what the watching eyes decided. Private fears lived in those first moments of being noticed. The brother thought of the games they had played as children, the way they used to finish each other's sentences without effort. He wondered what these eyes wanted from that closeness, yet he kept his face calm and his voice low when he spoke to his sister. She leaned her head briefly against his shoulder, the way she had done on long journeys before, and the small contact steadied them both. Around them, other prisoners moved with the same careful awareness. A woman who had arrived with her own twin daughters kept them tucked close to her sides, her arms forming a quiet shield. When the steady eyes passed by, she did not look away, but she also did not let her fear show in her face. Instead, she whispered a few words about the sky above them, about how it still stretched wide and blue, the same sky that watched over their home. Small kindnesses began to appear in the spaces between the observations. A fellow prisoner who had already felt the weight of that gaze offered a sip of water to the brother and sister, holding the cup steady so neither would spill a drop. The gesture was simple, yet it carried the warmth of someone who understood what it felt like to be seen in a new and uncertain way. Later, when the lines had moved and the watching eyes had turned elsewhere, another woman sat near the twins and shared a story from her own childhood, something gentle about two little birds that always stayed together. Her voice stayed soft, almost like a lullaby, and the brother and sister listened with their shoulders touching, drawing comfort from both the story and the presence of someone who chose to sit with them. Letters continued to live in many hearts during those early days of quiet observation. A father who had arrived with his twin sons imagined writing to his wife about the way the eyes had rested on the boys. He pictured describing how the twins had stayed close, how they had looked at each other with the same silent understanding they had always shared. In his mind, the letter ended with the promise that he would keep them safe with whatever strength he still carried. The thought of his wife reading those words by their kitchen window gave him a small, steady anchor. Others carried similar imagined letters, folded carefully inside, filled with ordinary love and the quiet determination to protect what mattered most. Everyday heroism showed itself in the choice to remain gentle even under the weight of attention. When one of the twins stumbled slightly from tiredness, another prisoner reached out without hesitation and helped him stand again, the motion so natural it might have happened in any ordinary street. The watching eyes did not stop these small acts. They continued in the barracks at night, when people gathered close and shared whatever warmth they could offer. A woman who had felt the gaze earlier in the day now sat beside a pair of twins and offered them a corner of her thin blanket, tucking it carefully around their shoulders. The simple gesture said more than words could. They were not alone in whatever came next. The eyes continued to move through the camp, resting here and there, yet the quiet resilience of those who were watched grew stronger in response. Twins held each other's hands a little longer. Families stayed close when they could. Strangers offered comfort in the form of a shared story or a steadying touch. These small lights of connection became a form of everyday courage, ways of saying without speaking that the human heart could still reach outward even when it felt most observed. The unease never fully left, yet it shared space with something warmer, something that refused to be extinguished by a gaze alone. In the quiet hours after the watching had passed for the day, many lay awake and thought of the eyes that had lingered. They remembered the way they had stayed close to those they loved, the way small kindnesses had appeared like unexpected lights. These moments became part of the private stories they carried inside, stories of fear held gently and hope kept alive through the simplest of connections. These early moments under watchful eyes, filled with quiet fear and the small lights of human connection, remind us of the hidden personal stories of resilience that lived even in the most observed places. For more on the forgotten operations and the secret acts of courage that shaped those years, you can receive the free ebook The Shadow War, 5 Top Secret Operations That Shaped World War II, along with weekly deep dives straight to your inbox. It is a gentle way to explore the quieter sides of history that often go unseen. Please, To keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As you rest now in the gentle dark, let these memories of steady eyes and reaching hands settle softly around you. Picture the linked fingers of twins, the whispered story shared in the barracks, the imagined letter folded with love. These small lights of quiet resilience still shine across the years. Carry them with you into sleep, knowing that even under careful watching, hearts found ways to stay close and keep kindness alive. Sleep peacefully, held by the soft rhythm of these enduring stories. In the quiet spaces where twins moved as reflections of one another, their shared hearts held both fear and an unbreakable tenderness. There, in the camp where certain faces were noticed for their sameness, brothers and sisters who had once shared the same cradle now shared the same uncertain days. They walked side by side when they could, their steps falling into the old familiar rhythm they had known since childhood. A brother would glance at his sister and see not only her face but also the memory of their mother's kitchen, the way sunlight used to fall across the table where they ate together. That reflection lived inside him, steady and warm, even when the present felt narrow and unfamiliar. Private fears visited them in the soft hours before sleep. A sister lay awake and wondered what the watching eyes wanted from the closeness she and her twin had always carried so naturally. She thought of the secrets they had shared as children, the whispered plans made under blankets, the way one could finish the other's sentence without effort. The memory brought both comfort and a gentle ache. She reached out in the darkness and found her brother's hand already searching for hers. Their fingers linked without a word, the simple touch saying everything that needed to be said, "We are still together." Small kindnesses wove through their days like threads of light. When one twin felt the weight of quiet observation more heavily, the other would stay close, offering a low story from their shared past. A tale about the old apple tree in their garden, or the way they used to race each other down the lane after school. The words were soft, almost like a lullaby, and they carried both of them back to a time when the world had felt larger and safer. Other prisoners sometimes noticed these quiet exchanges and offered their own gentle gestures, a shared crust of bread, a steadying hand when the line moved too quickly. These small acts of everyday heroism reminded the twins that even in the narrowest places, hearts could still reach outward. Letters continued to live inside them, imagined and folded with care. A brother carried whole messages in his mind that he would have written to his parents if he could. He pictured describing how he and his sister still finished each other's thoughts, how the old bond had become their quiet strength. He imagined his mother reading those words by the window and smiling the same gentle smile she had worn when they were small. The thought gave him a small, steady anchor that helped him face another day of being watched. His sister held similar imagined letters close, filled with ordinary love and the promise that their kinship would remain unbroken no matter what came. Moments of tenderness appeared in the smallest gestures. One twin would adjust the other's thin covering at night, tucking it carefully so both could feel a little warmth. They would sit close during the long evenings, shoulders touching, and let the silence between them speak of everything they had shared since birth. These were not grand displays, but the quiet heroism of continuing to love in the old way, of protecting the reflection of oneself that lived in another person. When one felt fear rise like a soft wave, the other would whisper a single word from their childhood, a nickname only they used, and the fear would soften into something they could carry together. The mirrors of kinship grew stronger with each passing day. Twins who had once been separated for a little while would find each other again and exchange a look that held entire conversations. They remembered the games they played, the songs their grandmother sang, the way the world had felt when they were two halves of the same whole. These memories became quiet acts of resistance against the watching and the uncertainty. They refused to let the bond be broken, even when circumstances tried to pull them apart. Other prisoners sometimes joined in these small circles of care, offering a story or a touch that honored the closeness the twins carried. In the long nights when sleep came slowly, many twins lay awake and felt the presence of their sibling nearby. They thought of the eyes that had noticed their sameness and the way they had answered that noticing with their own quiet unity. The kinship became a source of everyday courage, a reminder that they were not alone in whatever lay ahead. They held on to the tenderness they had always known, letting it steady them when the present felt sharp and unfamiliar. These mirrors of kinship and the tender bonds that sustain twins through quiet watching remind us of the deep human connections worth honoring across time. In the same spirit of remembering courage and quiet strength in the wider war, you might find comfort in holding a piece of that history close through beautiful WW2 memorabilia or by watching the film Midway on Prime. Stories that capture the spirit of those who stood together in uncertain times. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As you rest now in the gentle dark, let these reflections of shared hearts and quiet tenderness settle softly around you. Picture the linked hands in the darkness, the whispered story from childhood, the imagined letter folded with love. These small lights of kinship still shine across the years. Carry them with you into sleep, knowing that even under careful watching, twins found ways to keep their unbreakable bond alive. Sleep peacefully, held by the soft rhythm of these enduring stories. Where quiet veils fell over hopes for the future, women found new ways to hold one another in the softest of silences. There, in the block set apart for certain quiet procedures, women moved through their days with a new kind of awareness. They had been brought together from many places, carrying stories of homes and families they might never see again. The air inside felt close, yet something gentle began to grow between them. They learned to read each other's eyes without words, to offer a steady presence when grief rose like a soft wave inside the chest. A woman lay on her thin mattress after one of the quiet procedures and felt the weight of what had been taken settle over her like a veil she could not lift. She thought of the children she had once imagined holding, the way their laughter might have filled a small room. The grief came quietly, not in loud sobs but in the slow tightening of her breath. She turned her face toward the wall for a moment, letting the tears fall where no one could see. When another woman noticed the way her shoulders shook, she came closer and sat on the edge of the mattress without speaking. Her hand rested lightly on the grieving woman's back, a touch that said everything words could not. You are not alone in this sorrow. Private fears lived alongside the grief. A younger woman wondered what her future would look like now, whether the dream she had carried since childhood could still find a place to rest. She thought of her mother's garden and the way flowers returned each spring, and she wondered if some kinds of blooming were no longer meant for her. The fear rose and fell with each quiet breath. Yet when she looked around the block and saw other women moving with the same careful dignity, the fear softened into something she could carry. She reached out to help an older woman adjust her covering, the simple act of giving comfort becoming a small light against her own darkness. Letters continued to live in many hearts even when they could not be written on paper. One woman carried whole messages inside her, words she would have sent to her sister about the quiet strength she was finding among these women. She imagined describing how they sat together in the evenings, sharing stories of home and of the children they had once hoped to raise. The thought of her sister reading those words by a window gave her a small, steady anchor. Others held similar imagined letters close, filled with ordinary love and the quiet determination to keep their inner light burning even when the future felt veiled. Small moments of kindness wove through the days like threads of quiet defiance. When one woman returned from a procedure, another would bring her a sip of water or sit beside her until the ache eased. They learned to move carefully around one another, respecting the private grief while offering presence. A woman who had gone through the same quiet trial earlier in the week now helped a newcomer settle onto her mattress, tucking the thin covering around her shoulders with gentle hands. The gesture was small, yet it carried the weight of shared understanding. These everyday acts of heroism became the way they protected one another when larger protections were not possible. In the long evenings, when the light faded and the block grew dim, women gathered in small circles. They spoke in voices so low they were almost felt rather than heard. One would share a memory of her village, another would offer a fragment of a song her mother used to sing. These quiet exchanges became a form of unspoken solidarity, a way of saying that even though certain hopes had been veiled, their capacity to care for one another remained unbroken. They sat close, shoulders touching, and let the simple presence of sisterhood hold them steady. The veils of private grief did not lift easily, yet the women found ways to live beneath them with quiet resilience. They continued to offer comfort, to share stories, to hold space for one another's sorrow without judgment. When one woman felt the weight of lost dreams press too heavily, another would sit with her in silence, their hands lightly linked. These moments of tenderness became the hidden strength that sustained them. They refused to let the procedures take their ability to reach outward with kindness. In the quiet hours before sleep, many lay awake and thought of the women around them. They remembered the steady hands that had offered water, the low voices that had shared stories, the silent presence that had eased the sharpest edges of grief. These memories became small lights that helped the nights pass more gently. The solidarity they wove together became a quiet form of resistance, a way of keeping their humanity intact even when the future felt uncertain and veiled. These veils of private grief and the unspoken solidarity among women show the deeper, often unseen human stories that lived inside the hardest times. To feel closer to those raw and personal moments that are usually kept from view, there is a special collection on Gumroad with unseen, raw images and videos from the war, too restricted for most platforms, offering a more intimate window into the quiet strength and connections people held onto. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As you rest now in the gentle dark, let these memories of steady hands and shared silence settle softly around you. Picture the gentle touch on a grieving back, the low voice sharing a story of home, the imagined letter folded with love. These small lights of quiet resilience and sisterhood still shine across the years. Carry them with you into sleep, knowing that even when veils fell over hopes for the future, women found ways to hold one another with unbreakable tenderness. Sleep peacefully, held by the soft rhythm of these enduring bonds. Where shadows of unseen air settled over the breath, hearts learned to find reassurance in the quiet presence of one another. There, in the places set apart for certain quiet tests, the air itself seemed to carry a different weight. People were brought into rooms where the atmosphere changed in ways they could not see or name. The fear lived first in the chest, a tightening that made each breath feel precious and uncertain. A man stood at the threshold and felt his heart beat faster, yet he kept his face steady. He thought of his wife's hand resting on his arm the last time they had walked together, and the memory brought a small steadiness that helped him step forward. Private fears rose like gentle waves inside many who entered those rooms. One woman held her breath longer than necessary, as if by holding it she could keep the unseen shadow from touching her fully. She pictured her children's faces and the way they used to run to her when they were frightened. The image stayed with her even as the air around her grew heavier. When the test ended and she was helped out, another prisoner was already waiting with a cup of water. The cup was offered without words, the hand that held it steady and warm. Their eyes met for a moment, and in that glance passed the quiet understanding that they had both walked through the same shadow and returned. Small kindnesses appeared in the spaces between the tests. A man who had gone through the room earlier in the day now sat beside someone who was still trembling from the experience. He spoke in a low voice about nothing important, the way the clouds had looked that morning, the sound of birds that still sang beyond the fences. The words were simple, yet they carried reassurance like a soft blanket placed over shaking shoulders. The listener closed his eyes and let the steady voice become an anchor, something real and human to hold onto when the memory of the changing air still lingered in his chest. Letters continued to live inside people even when they could not be written. A young man traced the shape of his mother's name in the air with one finger while he waited for his breathing to settle. He imagined telling her about the way another prisoner had offered water and stayed close afterward. He pictured her reading those words by the window of their home and feeling proud that her son had found kindness even in the narrowest places. The thought gave him a small, steady warmth that helped the fear soften into something he could carry. Everyday heroism showed itself in the choice to stay present for one another. When one person returned from the test looking pale and quiet, another would bring a thin blanket and tuck it carefully around their shoulders. The gesture was small, yet it said without words that no one had to face the lingering shadow alone. Women and men who had shared the same experience began to watch for each other. They learned to notice the slight change in breathing or the way someone's hands trembled, and they responded with quiet care. A sip of water, a steadying touch on the arm, a low story told in the evening, these became the threads that held them through the uncertainty. In the long nights that followed each test, many lay awake and listened to the breathing of those around them. They remembered the reassurance that had come from another's presence, the way a simple voice or a gentle hand had made the fear feel less sharp. These memories became quiet anchors. They spoke in low voices about ordinary things, the taste of bread, the feel of sunlight on skin, the sound of rain on a roof they once knew. The stories were not about the tests themselves, but about the life that still lived inside them, the life they refused to let the shadows take away. The chemical shadows came and went, yet the human connections that formed around them grew stronger. People learned to offer reassurance before someone entered the room and comfort when they returned. They shared whatever small comforts they could find, a corner of warmth, a piece of bread saved from earlier, a whispered word of encouragement. These everyday acts of heroism became the way they protected one another when larger protections were not possible. The fear never fully disappeared, but it shared space with something warmer, something that refused to be extinguished by unseen air. In the quiet hours before sleep, many carried the memory of hands that had reached out and voices that had stayed steady. They thought of the way reassurance had passed from one person to another like a quiet flame that no shadow could easily put out. These moments became part of the private stories they held inside, stories of fear met with kindness and uncertainty met with presence. These chemical shadows and the quiet reassurances shared among prisoners show how important it is to keep these human stories of gentle connection alive. Keeping these tender histories alive takes time, heart, and careful research so they can be told with the gentleness they deserve. If these quiet moments have touched you, a small tip on Ko-Fi, even as little as $1, helps support the dedication poured into crafting them so more people can carry their light forward. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As you rest now in the gentle dark, let these memories of steady voices and reaching hands settle softly around you. Picture the cup of water offered without words, the low story told in the evening, the imagined letter folded with love. These small lights of quiet reassurance still shine across the years. Carry them with you into sleep, knowing that even when shadows touched the breath, hearts found ways to offer comfort and stay present for one another. Sleep peacefully, held by the soft rhythm of these enduring stories. Where bones carried the weight of quiet trials, hearts found strength in the gentle encouragement of those who walked the same path. There, in the places where certain careful work was done on the body's foundation, people returned to the barracks carrying a new kind of ache. The pain lived deep, a steady presence that made every movement feel measured and slow. A man lay on his thin mattress and felt the pull along his leg, the place where something had been taken and something else had been placed in its stead. He kept his breathing even, the way he had learned to do when fear or discomfort rose. He thought of his father's hands, strong from years of work in the fields, and he pictured those hands resting on his shoulder the way they once had when he was small. The memory brought a small steadiness that helped the ache feel a little less sharp. Private fears visited in the quiet hours. A woman wondered whether her body would ever feel whole again, whether the steps she once took so easily would return. She lay still and let her thoughts drift to the garden she had tended, the way the earth felt under her feet in spring. The image stayed with her even as the discomfort moved through her in waves. When another woman who had gone through the same quiet trial earlier noticed the way she held her breath against the pain, she came closer and sat beside the mattress. Her voice was low and steady as she spoke of ordinary things, the color of the sky that morning, the way bread tasted when it was fresh. The words were simple, yet they carried encouragement like a hand placed gently on a trembling shoulder. Small kindnesses wove through the days of recovery like threads of quiet light. When one person needed help rising, another offered an arm without being asked. The support was steady and patient, given with the understanding that comes from having walked the same difficult path. A man who was further along in his own recovery now helped a newcomer adjust his position on the platform, moving slowly so as not to cause extra discomfort. Their eyes met in a brief glance that held more than words could say, "We are in this together." These everyday acts of heroism became the way they protected one another when the body felt most fragile. Letters continued to live inside many hearts even when they could not be written on paper. One man carried whole messages in his mind that he would have sent to his wife about the way others had stayed close during the hardest hours. He imagined describing how a fellow prisoner had sat with him through a long night of discomfort, speaking softly of home and of the strength that still lived inside them. The thought of his wife reading those words by their kitchen table gave him a small, steady anchor. Others held similar imagined letters close, filled with ordinary love and the quiet determination to keep moving forward, one careful step at a time. Encouragement appeared in the smallest gestures. A woman who was recovering brought a sip of water to someone whose pain had returned in the evening. She held the cup steady and waited until it was empty before setting it aside. The simple act of giving became a form of quiet strength that passed from one person to another. In the long evenings, when the light faded, people gathered close and shared stories that had nothing to do with the trials themselves. They spoke of rivers they had once walked beside, of songs their mothers had sung, of the feel of sunlight on skin. These stories became medicine of a different kind, reminders that life still held beauty even when the body carried new weight. The quiet resilience that grew during recovery was not loud or bold. It lived in the choice to keep offering comfort, to keep sharing stories, to keep believing that the body could heal even when the path was slow. When one person felt discouragement rise like a soft shadow, another would sit nearby and simply be present. The presence itself became encouragement, a steady reminder that no one had to carry the ache alone. These moments of tenderness wove a net of support that held everyone a little higher. In the nights that followed the procedures, many lay awake and felt the presence of those who had walked the same path. They remembered the steady voices, the gentle hands, the shared stories that had eased the sharpest edges of discomfort. These memories became quiet anchors that helped the nights pass more gently. The encouragement they offered one another became a form of everyday heroism, a way of saying without words that they would continue to care for each other through whatever came next. These stories of pain and the quiet encouragement among those who endured the trials on bone and body show the deeper human stories of resilience that lived even in the hardest places. For those who wish to explore these hidden layers of endurance and support with greater depth and community, the Patreon offers free podcasts, raw and unblurred video sections, and a place to connect with others who care about keeping these tender histories alive through open conversation and deeper dives. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As you rest now in the gentle dark, let these memories of steady hands and quiet voices settle softly around you. Picture the arm offered for support, the low story shared in the evening, the imagined letter folded with love. These small lights of quiet encouragement still shine across the years. Carry them with you into sleep, knowing that even when bones carried new weight, hearts found ways to offer comfort and keep moving forward together. Sleep peacefully, held by the soft rhythm of these enduring stories. Where thirst met the taste of distant seas, hearts turned toward memories of waves and the gentle promise of futures yet to come. There, in the quiet spaces where certain tests touched the body's need for water, people were given seawater to drink. The taste was sharp and unfamiliar, nothing like the fresh streams or rain they had once known. A man lifted the cup to his lips and felt the salt sting his tongue. He closed his eyes and let his thoughts drift far away, to the wide ocean he had seen only in pictures and in stories his grandfather used to tell. He pictured the waves rolling in slow and steady, the way the water caught the light at sunset and turned to gold. That image stayed with him even as the salt remained on his lips. Private fears rose with the thirst that followed. A woman wondered how long her body could continue without the clean water it needed. She thought of her children and the way they used to splash in the small river near their home. The memory brought both comfort and a gentle ache. She lay on her thin mattress afterward and let the picture of cool, moving water soothe the dryness in her throat. When another prisoner noticed the way she held her hand to her chest, she came closer and sat beside her. In a low voice she spoke of her own memories of the sea, of how the sound of waves had once lulled her to sleep on summer nights. The words were simple, yet they carried a shared longing that made the present thirst feel a little less sharp. Small kindnesses appeared in the hours after the tests. Someone who had saved a few drops of cleaner water from earlier in the day offered it quietly to a person whose mouth still tasted of salt. The gesture was done without expectation, simply because the heart still knew how to reach outward. Another prisoner shared a story of a beach he had once walked, describing the feel of sand between his toes and the way the wind carried the scent of salt and freedom. Those who listened closed their eyes and let the story become a small comfort, a way of traveling in their minds to a place where water was plentiful and kind. Letters continued to live inside many hearts during these days of seawater and thirst. A young man carried whole messages in his mind that he would have sent to his sister about the dreams that visited him after each test. He imagined telling her of the wide ocean he pictured, of how he held onto the hope that one day they would walk together beside real waves. The thought of her reading those words by a window gave him a small, steady anchor. Others held similar imagined letters close, filled with ordinary love and the quiet determination to keep dreaming of futures where water was clean and cool and shared freely. Everyday heroism showed itself in the choice to keep offering comfort even when one's own body felt dry and weary. When someone returned from a test looking pale, another would sit nearby and speak of imagined futures in gentle detail. They described villages by the sea where children played in the shallows, where families gathered at dusk to watch the sun sink into the water. These stories became a form of quiet encouragement, ways of saying that even in the present thirst, the heart could still reach towards something beautiful and whole. The resilience lived in the decision to keep dreaming together, to keep sharing the small comforts of memory when the body asked for what it could not yet have. In the long evenings, when the light faded and the barracks grew dim, people gathered close and let their thoughts turn to the sea. One would describe the sound of waves against the shore, another would speak of the way the water felt cool against skin on a hot day. These shared dreams wove a net of quiet strength that held everyone a little higher. They refused to let the taste of salt and the ache of thirst take away their capacity to imagine something better. The dreams became anchors, holding them steady when the present felt narrow and dry. The seawater tests came and went, yet the memories of distant oceans and the imagined futures they carried remained. People continued to offer stories and small kindnesses, to hold space for one another's longing. These moments of tenderness became the everyday courage that sustained them. They kept the light of hope alive by turning together toward the sea that lived inside their minds, a sea that was wide and clean and full of promise. These seawater dreams and the quiet hopes of imagined futures remind us of the hidden stories of resilience that lived even when the body was tested. For more on the forgotten operations and the secret acts of courage that shaped those years, you can receive the free ebook The Shadow War, 5 Top Secret Operations That Shaped World War II, along with weekly deep dives straight to your inbox. It is a gentle way to explore the quieter sides of history that often go unseen. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As you rest now in the gentle dark, let these memories of waves and shared stories settle softly around you. Picture the cool ocean in the mind's eye, the low voice describing distant shores, the imagined letter folded with love. These small lights of quiet hope still shine across the years. Carry them with you into sleep, knowing that even when thirst met the taste of salt, hearts found ways to dream of clean water and gentle futures together. Sleep peacefully, held by the soft rhythm of these enduring stories. In the deep quiet of the gypsy camp, where the night air carried the softest of sounds, the whispers began their gentle journey from one soul to another. The camp lay under a sky that seemed both far away and very near, the stars like tiny eyes watching over the rows of simple shelters. In that space between day and the next, when the world outside grew still, the people inside turned to each other with voices that barely disturbed the air. It was a time for the heart to speak what the daylight often kept hidden, the private fears that lived in the chest, the small hopes that refused to fade, the memories that felt like home even when home was only a thought. These whispers were not loud enough to travel beyond the immediate circle, yet they reached exactly where they were needed, filling the silence with a presence that said, "You are not alone in this." Consider the grandmother whose life had been a long road of stories. Each evening she would gather the young ones close, her shawl wrapped around as many as could fit. Her words came slow and measured, like footsteps on a familiar path. She told of the wagons that rolled from village to village, of the music that spilled from open doors and into the night air, of the way families had always found ways to celebrate even the simplest joys. As she spoke, her voice would soften further, almost becoming part of the darkness itself. The children would lean in, their small bodies relaxing against hers, and one could see in their faces how the story was carrying them somewhere safer for a little while. She did not speak of what lay outside the camp that night. Instead, she gave them the gift of remembering who they were before, and who they could still be. When her eyes grew tired, she would end with a simple blessing whispered just for them, a wish for peaceful dreams and the strength to greet the morning. That blessing often stayed with the children long after sleep had taken them, a quiet armor against the fears that might visit in the dark. The way her voice rose and fell with the rhythm of the old tales made the children feel as if they were sitting by a fire in a forest clearing from long ago, the smell of wood smoke and the sound of leaves in the wind all around them, even though the only fire was the one in their own hearts. And in that moment, the camp felt a little less vast, the night a little less long. Nearby, in the shadows of another shelter, the young man continued his silent correspondence. He had no paper, no pen, but the letters he composed were written with the careful attention of someone who knew each word mattered. He would begin with the date he no longer knew for certain, then move to the greetings that felt like an embrace across distance. He described the way the light fell across the ground in the morning, how it painted the ground in colors that still held beauty. He mentioned the kindness of a stranger who had shared a word of encouragement, the way it had lifted his spirit for hours. He asked after her health, her garden if she still had one, the small things that made a day whole. And at the end, he would always add that he carried her love with him, that it was the one thing no wall or distance could touch. Sometimes he would read a line aloud to the friend who sat beside him in the same quiet. The friend would smile faintly and offer a line for his own imagined letter, and together they would build a small bridge of words that belonged only to them. These letters were never sent, yet they traveled farther than any post could reach, because they carried the sender's truest self. The friend might then share his own memory, a small moment from before the camp, and the two would sit in the afterglow of that shared imagining, feeling the connection to home grow a little stronger in their hearts. Sometimes, after the imagined letter was finished, the young man would sit for a while with his eyes closed, letting the words settle inside him like seeds planted in good soil. The tears that came then were not only of sadness but also of relief, because the act of reaching out, even in thought, reminded him that his heart was still capable of love and memory. The kindness that lived in the camp often revealed itself in gestures so small they might have gone unnoticed by anyone not looking closely. One woman, noticing that her neighbor's hands were shaking from the cold, took her own thin blanket and draped it across the other's shoulders for a moment, just long enough to share the warmth she had gathered. The neighbor's eyes filled with gratitude that needed no words, and later that night, when a bit of extra bread appeared near the first woman's place, no one had to ask who had left it. Another evening, when a child cried out in sleep from a bad dream, several voices rose in soft reassurance, each one adding a layer of calm until the little one settled again. These acts were not planned or announced. They simply happened, born from the understanding that everyone carried a burden, and that easing in others even a little made the load lighter for all. In the giving, the giver found a sense of purpose, a reminder that they still had something to offer in a world that often took so much. A young girl, seeing her friend sit alone with eyes full of unspoken worry, might offer a small stone she had found earlier, smooth and warm from her hand, saying in a whisper that it could be a friend to hold when words were hard to find. The friend would take it, and the stone would become a silent companion through the night, a reminder that kindness could take many forms. And in that small exchange, both the giver and the receiver felt a spark of something warm and alive, something that said the world had not yet taken everything from them. Kindness like this had a way of spreading, as if one act opened the door for another, until the whole shelter seemed to hold a little more light than it had before the sun went down. Resilience wove itself into the very air through the music that lived inside them. Even when instruments were gone or silent, the melodies remained, carried in throats and hearts. A low hum would start from one corner, a tune from childhood festivals or long roads traveled under stars. Another voice would join, then another, until the sound became a gentle river flowing through the camp. The words were in their own language, words that spoke of love and loss and the endless turning of seasons. No one sang loudly enough to draw attention from beyond their circle, yet the harmony grew strong enough to fill the space between the shelters. Children would learn the verses by listening, their lips moving along even when they did not yet know all the meanings. An elder might add a harmony that had been passed down through his own family line. These songs were acts of quiet defiance against forgetting, a way of saying that the spirit of their people could still find expression, even here. When the last note faded, the silence that followed felt different, less empty, more like a shared breath held and then released together. The music carried the weight of all they had lost and all they still held, and in singing it, they reclaimed a piece of themselves that no one could take away. In the same way, there were those who returned from the places where the doctors worked in silence, their bodies marked by questions they could not answer and their spirits carrying a new kind of tiredness. On those nights, the whispers took on a special gentleness, circling around the one who had been away without ever asking for details that could not be shared. A friend might sit close and simply be there, offering the comfort of presence, while another would quietly prepare a place to rest. The fear that had walked with them to those rooms and back again would find a place to rest too, held by the knowledge that others understood without needing words. This quiet witnessing was its own form of everyday heroism, the choice to stay open to another's pain even when one's own heart was full of its own shadows. It was the decision to keep the circle unbroken, to let the whispers continue their work of mending what had been frayed. There were nights when the everyday heroism showed itself in the simple decision to stay present for one another. When the lists were read and some names were called, a mother might hold her daughter's hand a little tighter, her whisper carrying both fear and fierce love. Whatever comes, remember who you are. The daughter would nod, drawing courage from that steady voice. Or a brother, seeing his sibling falter under the weight of the day, would step in with a quiet joke or a memory from home, anything to bring a small smile and lighten the moment. These choices did not change the larger course of things, but they changed the experience of it for the ones who received them. They turned isolation into connection, fear into something that could be faced with another heart nearby. A father who had stood in front of his child earlier might later sit with that child, telling a story of his own childhood bravery in a whisper, passing on the lesson that standing for love was always worth the risk. The whispers did more than comfort in the moment. They carried the names and faces of those who had gone before, keeping them present in the daily life of the camp. Someone would mention a laugh that had once filled the air, or a song that a certain person had loved, and the memory would pass from voice to voice like a treasured object. In this way, the camp became a living book of stories, written not in ink but in breath and remembrance. The private fears, the wondering if tomorrow would bring another call, the ache of missing those who had been lost, the uncertainty of what the doctors in the quiet rooms were truly seeking, found space to be acknowledged without having to be spoken aloud in full. A glance, a shared sigh, a hand that lingered a moment longer than necessary, these were the ways the fears were witnessed and being witnessed, made a little less sharp. The resilience was not in denying the darkness but in refusing to let it have the final word. Each whisper was a small victory, a declaration that the human heart could still reach out, still offer light, still choose connection even when everything else felt broken. And as the whispers continued night after night, they built a quiet strength that no single person could have found alone. These stories of quiet strength and whispered kindness have a way of staying with us, long after the night has passed and the camp has become a memory held in history. In our own moments of stillness, when we pause to remember the personal feelings and small kindnesses that define so many lives, we can feel connected to that same enduring spirit. If you find yourself drawn to the intimate side of history, the imagined letters, the tokens of love, the everyday acts that revealed the heart's true bravery, then you might appreciate a thoughtful collection of WW2 memorabilia. These pieces often include replicas of personal letters and meaningful artifacts from the time, offering a tangible way to hold onto the human stories that whisper across the years. It is a simple way to bring a bit of that resilience and connection into your own evenings, and I share it with you as one who cares about keeping these memories alive in a gentle, meaningful way. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. In the soft light before the day fully opened its eyes, the needle touched the flesh and began to write in ink that would never fade. The mark settled slowly, the skin accepting the dark lines as if they were a story being told without words. In the camps where so many bodies passed through, this quiet writing became part of the morning rhythm, yet for each person it arrived as something entirely their own. The cool press of the tool against warm skin, the small sting that followed, the way the ink sank in and stayed, these were felt in the private chambers of the heart long before the arm was lowered again. No one spoke loudly of it. The whispers came later, in the shelter of evening, when the mark had already begun to heal and the person carrying it had already begun to learn its weight. A young woman stood in line that morning, her thoughts drifting far from the present moment. As the needle traced the first careful strokes, her mind traveled to the small room she had once called home, to the child whose laughter still echoed in her memory like a distant bell. She imagined writing a letter she could never send. "They have placed a number upon my arm today," the letter would say. "It is small and dark, like a secret written where only I can see it clearly. It hurts a little, but when I close my eyes I see your face and the pain grows quiet. I am still your mother." The ink cannot change that. Her private fear was not of the mark itself, but of what it might mean for the life she hoped to return to one day. Would the number stay between her and the world she loved? Would it become the first thing anyone noticed? Yet even as the fear rose, she felt a quiet thread of something stronger, the knowledge that her true name lived in the hearts of those who waited for her, untouched by any ink. Nearby, an older man watched the same process with eyes that had already seen too many changes. When his turn came, he offered his arm without protest, but inside he traced the shape of his own name in his mind, the one he had carried through years of work and family and ordinary days. The ink settled into his skin like a new signature he had not chosen. Later, in the stillness of night, he would sometimes roll up his sleeve just enough to look at it, his finger moving slowly along the lines as if reading a book written on his own body. The mark did not erase the man he had been. Instead, it became a silent companion, a reminder that he was still here, still breathing, still able to remember the feel of his wife's hand in his or the taste of bread baked in his own kitchen. He never spoke of it with anger. He simply carried it, and in carrying it he found a small, steady strength that surprised even him. Kindness moved through these moments in ways that asked for nothing in return. After the marking, when the skin was still tender, a fellow prisoner might offer a clean corner of cloth dampened with a little water, pressing it gently against the new lines to ease the heat. The gesture was quick and wordless, yet it said everything that needed saying. You are not alone with this. Another time, someone who had received their own mark days earlier would sit close and speak softly of a memory from before, a festival, a river, a song, anything to give the mind a place to rest while the body adjusted. These small acts did not change the mark, but they changed the way it was felt. The ink remained, yet the heart around it grew a little warmer, a little more held. Quiet resilience showed itself in the simple decision to keep living inside the marked body. People continued their daily tasks with the same careful hands they had always used, whether mending a torn sleeve or sharing a crust of bread. In the evenings, when the light grew low, small groups would sometimes compare their marks not as badges of shame but as threads that now connected them. We all carry this writing now, one might whisper, yet our voices still know our real names. They would speak of the lives they had lived before the ink arrived, the trades they had practiced, the children they had raised, the homes they had tended. The mark became part of the story, but never the whole story. It was the skin that held it, the spirit moved freely around it, finding ways to keep dignity alive in the smallest of gestures, a straight back, a gentle tone, a shared glance that said I see you beyond the number. Everyday heroism lived in those who had already walked this path and chose to steady others. An older prisoner, his own mark long healed, might notice the fresh lines on a newcomer's arm and offer a quiet word of guidance, how to keep the skin clean, how to move the arm so it did not pull. More than the practical advice, it was the presence that mattered, the simple act of sitting beside someone who felt newly changed and saying, without many words, that the change did not have to be faced in silence. Sometimes the heroism was even quieter, a hand resting lightly on a shoulder during the moment the needle worked, a steady breath offered as company so the person being marked did not have to hold their own breath alone. These choices asked for no recognition. They simply refused to let the mark become a wall between one heart and another. In the camps where such markings took place, the body was often treated as something to be recorded and studied, the skin examined for how it held or rejected the ink, how it healed or sometimes did not. Yet the true record was never only on the surface. Beneath the visible lines lived the unseen stories, the private fears that rose at night, the letters written only in the mind, the small kindnesses that passed from hand to hand, the quiet resilience that kept a person walking forward even when the mark felt heavy. The ink wrote on the flesh, but the flesh remembered more than the number. It remembered the warmth of another's touch, the sound of a whispered name, the steady rhythm of a heart that refused to forget who it belonged to. These marks on skin carried the weight of countless unseen lives, stories written in feeling rather than in any book. Just as the ink settled into the flesh while the deeper truths of courage and connection lived quietly beneath, there exist raw images and videos from those years that capture the hidden, personal layers of the war, moments too intimate or restricted for ordinary viewing. If the quiet stories of marks and memory have stayed with you, you might find gentle value in a digital collection offered through Unseen Media on Gumroad. It gathers unseen photographs and short videos that reveal the human side of those times in ways that feel close and honest, like opening a private album of the everyday strength and small connections we have been speaking of. It is something I offer as a friend who believes these hidden glimpses can help us hold the history a little more tenderly in our own hearts. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. When the cup was lifted in the fading light, the water inside held the weight of many silent prayers. In the camps where days stretched long and dry, water arrived in small portions that felt both precious and uncertain. People waited for it with a quiet ache in the throat that spoke of more than simple thirst. It was the body remembering what it needed to keep going, and the heart wondering what the next sip might carry. The water sometimes tasted of earth or metal, a reminder that nothing in this place was quite as it once had been. Yet even in that uncertainty, the moment of drinking became a small ceremony, a pause where eyes might meet and something unspoken passed between those who shared the weight. A young man stood among others as the cup came near, his thoughts drifting to the stream that ran behind his family's home long ago. He could almost hear the clear rush of it over stones, the way it had tasted cold and sweet on summer afternoons. As the cup reached him, he took only what he needed and passed the rest onward, though the dryness in his mouth asked for more. In his mind he began a letter he would never write. Today the water came again, it would say. It was not like the stream at home, yet when I drank I thought of you and the way you used to fill the jug from the well. I am still here. The thirst comes and goes, but the memory of your voice stays with me like a cool place inside. His private fear was not only of the dryness but of the silence it brought, the way long hours without enough water made thoughts slow and heavy, as if the mind itself were walking through dust. Still, he chose to pass the cup rather than keep it, because in that small giving he felt a thread of himself remain unbroken. Nearby, a woman watched the same cup move through the line. Her own thirst had been sharp since morning, yet when it reached her she noticed the tired eyes of the person beside her. Without thinking long, she tipped a little more into the other's portion before taking her own. The gesture was so quiet that no one spoke of it, yet the warmth that followed was real. The one who received the extra sip looked up for a moment, and in that glance was a thanks deeper than words. Later, when the light had gone and the shelters grew still, the woman lay awake feeling the dryness return. She did not regret the giving. Instead, she held the memory of that shared glance like a secret stone in her pocket, something solid she could turn over in her thoughts when the night felt longest. Kindness like this did not fill the cup again, but it filled something else, the quiet space where fear might otherwise have settled. In the evenings, when the day's small ration had been taken and the body asked for what it could not have, people found other ways to ease the ache. Some would close their eyes and remember rain on a roof, or the sound of a kettle singing on a stove. Others would speak softly to one another of rivers they had known, describing the way sunlight danced on the surface or how the water had felt against skin on hot days. These stories became a different kind of water, one that could be shared without measure. A father might tell his child of the lake where they had once floated together, his voice low so the memory stayed gentle. The child would listen, eyes growing heavy, and for a little while the thirst inside seemed to rest. This was quiet resilience, the choice to nourish the spirit even when the body went without. It asked for no strength that anyone lacked. It only asked that the heart remember it could still give something, even when the cup was empty. There were also the small heroisms that appeared when someone needed water more than others. An older prisoner, seeing a younger one grow faint from the day's work, might save a sip from his own portion and carry it carefully to where the other rested. The journey across the small space between them felt long, yet the hand that offered the cup did not tremble. "Take this," the whisper would say. "It is only a little, but it is yours." The one who received it drank slowly, eyes closing as the coolness moved through the dryness. In that moment the giver stood a little taller, not from pride but from the simple knowledge that care could still move from one person to another. These acts were never announced. They happened in the spaces between tasks, in the folds of the day where no one watched. Yet they wove a net of connection that held many through the hardest hours. The water itself might have been limited or uncertain, but the willingness to share it became a steady current running beneath everything else. In the places where water was watched and sometimes tested in quiet ways, the body's response to thirst or to what it drank became a matter of careful observation. People felt these changes in their own skin and breath, yet they also felt something the observations could not reach, the way a shared sip or a remembered stream could steady the heart even when the throat remained dry. The waters might have carried uncertainty, but the small kindnesses that moved alongside them carried something pure. A hand steadying in others as the cup was passed, a story told to ease the waiting, a portion given away without expectation, these were the true measures of what sustained life when everything else felt scarce. These stories of thirst and the quiet ways people answered it with care have been gathered and shaped with long attention to the voices that once lived them. If listening to these gentle accounts of endurance and shared moments has brought you any sense of connection or reflection in your own quiet hours, and if you feel moved to help keep such stories flowing for others, you might consider leaving a small tip, whatever feels right, even $1, on my Ko-Fi page. Your support helps sustain the careful work of listening to these histories and offering them in the soft way they deserve, like adding a drop to a cup that others might one day drink from. It is a simple kindness that echoes the very spirit these stories carry. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. In the soft space where one breath met the next, the horizon ahead felt as if it had quietly fractured, its once steady line now holding small, uncertain breaks. People carried this inner landscape with them through the days, the future no longer stretching clear and whole but broken into pieces that asked to be held gently. The horizon was not only what the eye saw at the edge of the camp. It was the quiet picture each heart tried to keep of what might come after, of mornings without waiting, of voices that could speak freely again. When that picture cracked, the fear that rose was private and deep, the wondering whether the pieces could ever fit back together, whether the story that had been theirs before could still find its way forward. Yet even in the fracturing, small threads of care and memory began to appear, weaving across the breaks in ways no one had planned. A young woman lay in the dim shelter as night settled, her thoughts turning toward the family she had not seen in what felt like many seasons. The horizon in her mind showed cracks where plans for birthdays and quiet evenings had once stood whole. She imagined writing a letter she could never send, tracing the words slowly in her thoughts. The days here stretch long, the letter would say, and sometimes the line ahead feels broken, as if tomorrow has been set aside in pieces. Yet when I close my eyes I still see the table where we used to sit, the light through the window, your hand reaching for mine. I hold those pieces close. They are what keep the horizon from disappearing altogether. Her private fear was that the cracks might grow too wide, that the person she had been might slip through them and be lost. She did not speak this fear aloud. Instead, she turned it over like a smooth stone, feeling its weight and choosing, each time, to place it back inside the small pocket of hope she kept for herself. Nearby, an older man noticed the faraway look in her eyes and recognized the same quiet breaking in his own thoughts. He had once planned a garden for the years after his working life, rows of simple flowers and vegetables that would greet the sun each morning. Now those rows appeared in his mind with gaps where certainty had been. Rather than let the gaps widen, he chose a small kindness. In the evening hush he leaned close and spoke of the garden as if it still waited. "When we are home again," he whispered, "the first thing I will do is turn the soil. You can help plant the seeds if you like. They will grow slowly, but they will grow." The words were offered without promise of when or how. They were simply a thread laid across one of the fractures, a way of saying that the future, though broken, still had room for ordinary beauty. The young woman listened, and for a little while the cracks in her own horizon felt less sharp, as if someone had placed a gentle hand across the break to steady it. Quiet resilience showed itself in the smallest daily choices that pointed toward a horizon still worth facing. A person might rise each morning and smooth the rough blanket with careful hands, as if preparing a place for the day to rest. Another might hum a fragment of a song from childhood while waiting in line, the tune becoming a thin line of continuity that ran beneath the uncertainty. These acts did not mend the larger fractures, yet they kept the inner eye from turning away completely. They said, in their quiet way, that even a broken horizon could still be walked toward, one small step at a time. A father might take his child's hand during the long hours and describe, in the softest voice, the road they would walk together one day, past fields, past trees, all the way to a door that opened without fear. The child would nod, eyes half closed, and the description itself became a bridge across the break, a path made of words that could be followed even when the real path remained hidden. Everyday heroism lived in those who noticed the fractures in another's horizon and offered what they could to steady it. One evening, when the weight of the day had left several people sitting in silence, a woman who had already carried her own broken hopes for a long time moved to sit beside a younger man whose eyes held the particular emptiness of someone who had stopped picturing tomorrow. She did not ask what he saw or what he feared. Instead, she began to speak, very quietly, of a simple meal she remembered from her own childhood home, the smell of bread baking, the way steam rose from the pot on the stove. She described the table, the chairs, the window that looked out onto a small yard. As she spoke, the man's shoulders eased a little. The horizon in his mind, which had felt entirely cracked and dark, now held one small lit window, one table where someone might still sit. The woman was not promising anything. She was simply refusing to let the fracture stand alone. Her words became a quiet mending, a way of saying that even when the larger picture was broken, pieces of ordinary life could still be held and passed from one person to another. In the camps where the spirit was sometimes watched in its quiet trials, these small mends mattered more than any measurement could show. The horizons remained fractured for many, yet the threads of kindness, the imagined letters, the steady descriptions of future gardens and shared tables, these became the new lines that held the pieces together. They did not erase the breaks. They simply made the breaks bearable, turning what might have been empty space into places where connection could still live. A person might carry the mark of the day's fear, yet also carry the memory of a whispered story about tomorrow. The horizon was no longer one smooth line. It was a horizon made of many small, human lines laid side by side, each one a quiet act of refusing to let the future disappear entirely. These gentle accounts of fractured hopes and the quiet ways they were steadied have been shaped with care so they might rest softly in your own evening. If the stories of broken horizons mended by shared words and steady presence have touched something true in you, and if you wish to walk a little farther into these histories without the usual limits, you might enjoy becoming part of the Patreon community. There you can listen to free podcasts that expand these same quiet voices into longer conversations, watch raw and unblurred video sections that show the personal layers in fuller detail, and support the work through a simple tip jar whenever it feels right. Your presence there helps keep the gentle telling alive, like adding another steady thread across the horizon we share. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. In the dim quiet where a pen touched paper, the records began to gather their weight, holding more than names and lines that stretched across the page. People felt this gathering in ways the paper itself could never show. It was not only the ink settling into the surface, but the way a life seemed to settle into someone else's keeping, turned into marks that could be read and stored away. The wait was private and slow. It arrived in the moment when a question was asked and an answer given, when a detail of a body or a feeling was noted down. Some carried the moment afterward like a stone placed carefully inside the chest, while others found small ways to keep their own stories alive alongside whatever had been written. The records grew thick in their folders, yet the hearts that had been touched by them continued to move through the days, finding their own quiet ways to remember what no page could fully contain. A young man stood while his arm was examined and notes were made in a book nearby. The pen moved with steady care, writing things he could not see. As the ink formed its lines, his thoughts drifted far from the room. He pictured the small desk in his father's study where letters had once been written by hand, the way the paper had felt beneath his own fingers when he had tried to send news home. In his mind he began another letter, one that would never leave the camp. "They are writing things about me today," it said. Small marks on a page that feel heavier than they should. I do not know what the lines say, yet I feel them settle. Still, when I close my eyes I see the garden we planted together last spring, the way the earth smelled after rain. That is the record I choose to keep inside me. His private fear was that the written lines might someday speak louder than the life he had lived before, that the paper might become the only story others would know. He did not speak the fear. He simply let the imagined letter continue, adding the names of his brothers and the sound of their laughter, as if by writing them in his thoughts he could keep them safe from any folder that might close around him. Nearby, an older woman noticed the young man's quiet after the notes had been taken. She had felt the same weight many times, the sense that parts of her were being placed into a book that did not belong to her. Rather than let the silence grow heavy between them, she offered a small kindness. In the evening, when the light had softened, she leaned close and spoke of a memory from her own village, a festival where lanterns had floated on the river and children had run laughing along the banks. She described the colors of the lanterns and the way the water had reflected them, turning the night into something gentle and alive. The words were not about the records or the pen. They were simply a thread of ordinary beauty offered to someone whose own thread had felt pulled thin. The young man listened, and for a little while the weight inside his chest seemed to shift, as if the memory she shared had been placed gently beside the stone he carried, making the load easier to bear for that evening. Quiet resilience showed itself in the way people kept their own records when the official ones felt too heavy. In the hours before sleep, many would lie still and turn over in their minds the faces of those they loved, the small details that no pen had asked for. A mother might trace, in memory, the way her daughter's hair curled at the ends, or the exact sound of her son's voice when he asked for a story. These were private ledgers, kept not on paper but in the steady rhythm of breath and thought. They asked nothing of anyone else. They simply refused to let the weight of what had been written elsewhere erase what mattered most. Sometimes a person would share one of these inner records with a friend, whispering a single detail, a favorite meal, a song from childhood, so that the memory could live in two hearts instead of one. The sharing did not lighten the official pages, yet it made the personal pages inside grow stronger, more able to hold the days that followed. Everyday heroism appeared in those who noticed when the weight of records seemed to press too hard on another and chose to stand beside it. One evening, after a long day of questions and notes, a man saw a younger prisoner sitting apart, eyes fixed on nothing. The older man had carried his own share of written lines and knew the particular silence that followed. He did not ask what had been recorded or how it felt. Instead, he sat close and began to speak, very softly, of the work he had once done with his hands, carving small wooden figures for his grandchildren. He described the feel of the wood under the knife, the way the shavings curled and fell, the satisfaction of seeing a shape emerge from what had been only a block. As he spoke, the younger man's shoulders eased. The records that had been made earlier in the day did not disappear, but beside them now sat a different kind of record, the quiet story of hands that had created something beautiful, passed from one person to another in the dark. The older man stayed until the silence felt less sharp, then rose and moved on, having added nothing to any book yet having eased something that no book could touch. In the places where records were kept of how bodies and spirits responded to the days, the true weight often lived elsewhere. It lived in the private moments when a person chose to remember a name or a face that no page had asked for. It lived in the small kindnesses that passed between those who carried the same invisible load. It lived in the letters written only in the mind, where the future could still be pictured even when the present felt written in someone else's hand. These choices did not change what had been noted down. They simply kept the heart from becoming only what had been recorded. A person might walk through the day with the knowledge that their details lived in a folder, yet also walk with the knowledge that their grandmother's laugh, their child's first steps, their own quiet hopes, lived safely in the records they kept for themselves. These stories of records that carried weight and the quiet ways hearts answered that weight have been gathered with long and gentle attention. If the quiet burden of what was written and the private strength that lived alongside it have stayed with you through these evenings, you might find value in a free gift I have prepared for those who wish to carry these histories a little deeper. Sign up for the email newsletter and receive, at no cost, the ebook The Shadow War, 5 Top Secret Operations That Shaped World War II, along with weekly reflections that explore the hidden threads and personal layers behind the larger story. It is a simple way to keep the gentle remembering alive in your own time, and I offer it as one who has come to care deeply about these voices reaching those who listen with open hearts. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. In the hush that settled like soft snow over the crowded rooms each night, the truest resistance often began with nothing more than a single breath and a word spoken so low that only one other heart could catch it. Anna lay on the narrow space that was hers for those hours, her eyes open in the dark. The day had asked more of her body than she had thought possible, yet her mind kept returning to the small garden behind her childhood home, where the lavender grew in neat rows and the bees moved slowly in the warm air. She could almost smell it. Beside her, a younger girl named Ruth stared at the ceiling beams, her shoulders tight with all the questions that had no answers. Anna turned her head just enough and let the words drift out like a thread of smoke. "Tell me what your mother's hands felt like when she braided your hair," she whispered. Ruth was quiet for a long moment. Then she answered, her voice no louder than the rustle of a leaf. They spoke of ordinary things, sun on a windowsill, the sound of a kettle whistling, the way bread smelled when it was fresh from the oven, until the tight place in Ruth's chest loosened a little. In that exchange, something was protected that no one could take away. It was only a story, only a memory shared in the dark, yet it became a small island where both of them could stand for a while. Not far from them, Samuel kept a different kind of vigil. He had found a tiny scrap of paper no larger than a postage stamp and a pencil end no bigger than his thumbnail. Every few nights, when the others had grown still, he would write by the faint light that sometimes reached the high window. His letters were never long. One said simply, "The rain still falls on someone's roof tonight." Another read, "Your name is still your own." He never knew who would find them. He would tuck the paper into the fold of a blanket or slide it beneath the edge of a mattress before anyone stirred. Days later, when a stranger's fingers brushed against the hidden words, that person would read them in silence and feel, for a breath or two, that they were not entirely alone in whatever they were carrying. The notes traveled like quiet birds, passing from one hand to another without anyone tracing the path. They asked for nothing in return. They simply reminded the reader that someone, somewhere in the same darkness, had chosen to send a little light forward. There were evenings when kindness arrived without any words at all. One such night, after the long hours had left many feeling hollow, an older woman noticed the girl across the narrow aisle shivering beneath her thin covering. Without speaking, the woman shifted closer and let the edge of her own blanket fall across the girl's shoulders. Their arms touched lightly. The girl did not turn her head, but her breathing changed, becoming slower, deeper. In that small adjustment of fabric and nearness, a message passed: "You are seen, you are not forgotten, we are still here together." No one spoke of it the next morning. Yet both carried the memory of that warmth through the following day like a hidden coin they could turn over in their minds whenever the cold pressed in again. Many others wrote letters they could never send. A father named Elias spent the quiet hours composing them in his thoughts to the daughter he had not seen in what felt like another lifetime. "If these words ever reach you," he would say inside himself, "know that I watched the sky tonight and thought of the way you used to point at the stars and name them after the people we loved. I still name them for you." He repeated the same letter on different nights, changing only the small details, the color of the light through the window, the sound of someone humming far away, so that the message stayed alive and fresh in his heart. These unwritten letters became anchors. They kept the names of home and family from drifting out of reach. When the weight of the day threatened to pull everything under, Elias would close his eyes and read one of his own letters back to himself. The words, though never spoken aloud, held him steady. Resistance lived in these choices, repeated night after night. It lived in the decision to hum a lullaby so softly that only the person lying closest could hear the melody and perhaps join in on the second line. It lived in the habit of remembering a grandmother's recipe for soup and describing every step to someone who had not eaten properly in longer than they could count. It lived in the simple act of saying another person's name with care, as if that name still belonged to a full life with birthdays and favorite songs and plans for tomorrow. These were not gestures that changed the course of anything visible. They did not stop the questions or the weariness. But they kept something essential from breaking. They reminded each person who received them that they were still someone who could give comfort, still someone who could receive it, still someone whose heart could answer when another heart spoke. In the spaces between these moments, fear visited often. It came in the form of thoughts that arrived uninvited, whether a mother was still waiting by the window, whether a brother had found safety, whether the child who had been taken in another direction was cold or hungry or frightened. The fear was real and heavy. Yet even then, many chose to answer it with one more whispered sentence, one more remembered detail, one more small reach toward the person beside them. The choice did not make the fear disappear. It simply refused to let the fear be the only voice in the room. That refusal, offered again and again in the dark, became its own kind of steady light. These whispers traveled farther than anyone could measure. They moved from one person to another inside the same walls, and then, years later, they moved through the memories of those who had carried them. They moved into the stories told to children and grandchildren who had never known that particular darkness. They moved into the quiet hours of people today who sit with old letters or faded photographs and feel, for a moment, the same gentle insistence that someone once sent forward: hold on to what is human. Hold on to what is kind. Hold on to the ordinary things that make a life feel like your own. Just as those hidden notes and whispered memories carried strength across the darkness, today we can hold close similar echoes through carefully preserved pieces of history. If you find yourself drawn to these personal stories from the Second World War and want to bring a little of that quiet courage into your own evenings, some thoughtfully chosen WW2 memorabilia on Amazon can offer a tangible connection. Replica letters, personal keepsakes, and items that honor the individual voices and small daily acts of resilience feel like holding a thread that links us directly to the people who chose kindness when it mattered most. They make gentle companions for nights when you want to sit with these themes and let them settle softly. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Holding one of these pieces near, perhaps reading a reproduced letter by the light of a single lamp, can feel almost like sitting in the same quiet room where Anna once spoke of lavender and Ruth answered about her mother's hands. The connection is gentle but real. It reminds us that the heart's capacity to reach out never truly left those nights, and it has not left us either. These small treasures become a way of saying thank you to the ordinary people who kept their humanity alive in the simplest ways possible. They invite us to carry a little of that same steady light forward into our own lives, one quiet evening at a time. And in doing so, the whispers continue, soft, persistent, and still full of the same gentle strength that once refused to be extinguished. Even in Ravensbrück, where the light sometimes seemed to arrive only in thin ribbons through high windows, there were women who learned to carry a gentler glow inside themselves and pass it quietly to one another. One of them was Helena. She had come from a village where the mornings began with sunlight sliding across wooden floors and touching the faces of her children as they woke. In the evenings at Ravensbrück, when the day had asked more than seemed fair, she would lie still and let her mind return to that same light. She described it softly to the women nearest her. It moved like slow honey across the table, she whispered. It made the old wood look golden, and my little one would reach out her hand to catch the dust that danced in it. The others listened without moving. For a few minutes the room felt less closed in. The remembered sunlight became something they could almost feel on their own skin. Helena never raised her voice. She simply offered the picture again and again, like a small lamp she kept relighting with her words. Nearby, another woman named Sophie carried her own private light. She thought often of the lamp that had stood on her mother's sewing table, its warm circle falling on fabric and thread. When fear rose in her chest like a cold draft, she would close her eyes and picture that circle of light. She imagined it falling now on her mother's hands, still busy with gentle work. The image steadied her breathing. One night she shared it with the woman lying closest. "I am sending that lamp light to my mother right now," she said so quietly that only one person heard. "Perhaps she feels a little warmer because of it." The woman beside her reached out and touched Sophie's sleeve, a tiny gesture that said she understood. In that touch, the light moved from one heart to another without anyone else noticing. There were nights when the only light came from the stories they chose to keep alive. A small group of women began to pass a single memory between them like a shared candle. One would begin with the way sunlight looked on a river in summer. Another would add the sound of children laughing in that same light. A third would remember how the light turned the leaves almost transparent. They spoke in turns, each voice adding one more soft detail. No one interrupted. No one hurried. The story grew longer and brighter with each telling, until the darkness around them felt a little less complete. When the last voice finished, they lay in silence, each holding a piece of the light they had built together. It was not enough to change the day that would come, yet it was enough to help them meet it with steadier eyes. Kindness often arrived in the smallest shapes. One evening a woman noticed that the person across the narrow space had not spoken for many hours. Her eyes were open but seemed to see nothing. Without asking permission, the first woman shifted her thin blanket so that a corner of it covered the other's shoulder. She did not speak. She simply let the fabric rest there, sharing what little warmth she had. After a while the second woman's breathing changed. She turned her head slightly, and their eyes met for a moment. In that glance passed the whole sentence, "I see you still. You are not invisible here." The light of that simple act stayed with both of them through the following day. It did not take away the tiredness, but it gave each a small reason to keep noticing the person next to her. Many of the women wrote letters inside their minds that they could never send. One such letter lived in the thoughts of a woman who pictured her daughter standing by a window at home. When the morning light comes through the curtains, she wrote in her heart, "I hope it finds you first. I hope it touches your face the way it used to touch mine when I was small. I am keeping that same light safe for you until we can stand in it together again." She repeated the letter on different nights, changing only the color of the sky or the pattern the light made on the floor. The words became a private promise she kept renewing. They reminded her that somewhere, even if she could not see it, ordinary light was still falling on ordinary lives. That thought kept a corner of her own spirit from going dark. Everyday courage showed itself in these quiet choices. A woman who could barely stand would still reach out to steady another who was weaker. Someone who had almost no voice left would hum the beginning of a song from childhood, and others would join so softly that the sound barely left the space between them. These were not large acts. They did not change the larger story. Yet each one was a tiny refusal to let the light inside go out completely. Each one said, in its own way, that the people gathered here were still mothers and daughters and sisters and friends, still capable of giving and receiving care. The light they protected was not bright enough to fill a room, but it was steady enough to keep one more heart from closing. These small flames did not stay inside the walls. They traveled in the memories of those who carried them forward. They traveled in the stories told years later to children who had never known that particular darkness. They traveled into the quiet hours of people today who sit with old photographs or faded letters and feel, for a moment, the same gentle insistence that someone once offered in the dark. The light is still here if we choose to notice it and pass it on. The enduring light of Ravensbrück was never only a memory of sunlight through windows. It was also the light that lived in a shared glance, in a whispered description of home, in the simple decision to cover another person's shoulder with a corner of blanket. These were the moments that refused to be extinguished. They remind us that even when everything around feels heavy, the human heart can still choose to create and protect a little radiance for someone else. If these stories of quiet light have stayed with you and you find yourself wanting to see more of the actual faces and small, personal moments that carried it, I want to share something special with you. There is a digital collection on Gumroad from Unseen Media that gathers raw photographs and footage from the war years. These are the kinds of images and quiet scenes that show the everyday humanity, the light in people's eyes, and the small gestures of care we have been speaking about. They are too intimate and restricted for platforms like this one to show openly, yet they let you look directly into the personal reality behind the whispers and the enduring light. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Opening the collection can feel like stepping into an additional room of memory, where the light we have been following becomes visible in new ways. You may recognize the same steady courage in the faces and the small details that once lived only in stories told at night. These unseen glimpses do not replace the words we have shared here. They simply add another gentle layer, another way to sit with the enduring light and let it settle softly in your own quiet evening. In this way the light keeps moving forward, from one heart to another, across the years, still refusing to go out. Even as the final chill settled over Dachau like a thin layer of frost that would not lift, there were still hearts that found ways to offer a little warmth to the person beside them. In those long evenings when the cold seemed to live in the walls themselves, a man named Franz would lie awake and remember the kitchen of his childhood home. He could almost feel the heat rising from the old stove, the way it made the windows fog and turned the air soft against his face. He did not speak of the chill that pressed against his own skin now. Instead, he turned his head toward the younger man lying closest and began to describe the steam that used to rise from the soup pot. "It smelled of onions and patience," he whispered. "My mother would stir it slowly, and the whole room would grow warm before anyone took the first spoonful." The younger man listened without answering at first. Then, after a while, he asked a quiet question about the color of the steam in the lamplight. Franz answered gently, adding one more small detail. For those few minutes the cold receded from the space between their words. It did not disappear from the room, yet it lost some of its power to reach all the way inside them. Not far from Franz, a woman named Clara carried her own private chill. She thought often of her little daughter and wondered whether the child was warm enough wherever she was. The thought brought a sharper cold to her chest than the air around her. Yet Clara had learned that the only way to loosen that inner chill was to turn towards someone else. One evening she noticed a woman across the narrow passage whose hands were trembling more than usual. Without drawing attention, Clara shifted closer until their shoulders almost touched. She did not speak. She simply let the small shared space between them hold a little of the warmth that still lived in her own body. After a time the trembling eased. The other woman turned her face slightly, and their eyes met for a breath. In that meeting something passed that needed no words, a reminder that even here, two people could still choose to be less alone in the cold. Many wrote letters they could never send. One such letter lived inside the thoughts of a man who pictured his wife standing by the window of their small house. When the cold comes in the evenings, he wrote in his heart, "I hope you like the lamp we kept on the shelf. I hope the light falls on your hands while you wait. I am keeping the memory of that light warm for both of us." He repeated the letter on different nights, sometimes adding the sound of the kettle or the way the flame moved inside the glass. The words became a small fire he could tend inside himself. They did not change the chill that waited outside, but they gave him something steady to hold when the night felt longest. In the morning he would sometimes share a single line from the letter with the man beside him. The listener would nod and offer one line from his own unwritten letter in return. These fragments traveled between them like tiny coals passed from one palm to another. There were moments when everyday courage appeared in the simplest forms. A younger prisoner who still had a little strength left would quietly help an older man adjust the thin covering over his shoulders. He did it without being asked, without expecting thanks. Another evening someone began to hum a melody that belonged to summer, a song about fields that had once been warm under the sun. Others joined, their voices no louder than the movement of air. The song did not make the cold leave the room, yet it created a different kind of warmth that traveled from throat to throat and settled in the listening hearts. These were not large gestures. They did not alter the larger story. They simply refused to let the final chill be the only thing that existed between one person and the next. Private fears arrived with the cold. They came as questions without answers, whether a child was safe, whether a parent still waited, whether the body would have enough strength for whatever the next day might ask. The fears were real and heavy. Yet many learned that the chill of fear loosened a little when they chose to offer something small to someone else. A kind word spoken at the right moment, a hand briefly resting on another's arm, a memory shared in the dark, these acts did not remove the fear, but they gave it less room to grow. They reminded the giver and the receiver that they were still people capable of care, still connected to the ordinary human world where warmth had once been taken for granted. In the final chill there was also a different kind of waiting. No one knew exactly what the coming days would bring, only that something was shifting in the air beyond the walls. That uncertainty carried its own cold edge. Yet even then, the small acts of kindness continued. They became a quiet way of saying that whatever happened next, the choice to remain human had already been made many times over. A man who had almost no strength left would still save a corner of his portion for the person who seemed weaker. A woman would braid another's hair with slow, careful fingers, turning the simple act into a moment of dignity. These choices did not shout. They did not change the world outside. They simply kept a small steady flame alive inside the people who made them and the people who received them. The final chill did not win completely. It touched everything, yet it could not reach the places where one person had chosen to share warmth with another. Those places remained. They lived on in the memories carried forward by those who survived the cold. They lived on in the stories told later to children and grandchildren who would never feel that particular chill. They lived on in the quiet understanding that even in the coldest hours, the heart can still decide to be a source of gentleness rather than another layer of frost. These quiet acts of sharing warmth in the face of the final chill remind us that even in the coldest hours, the choice to care for one another can create its own gentle heat. If the time we have spent together with these stories has brought you a sense of connection or peace, and if you feel moved to help continue this careful work of bringing these human moments to light, I invite you to consider leaving a small tip on Ko-Fi. Even $1 or $2 helps support the many hours of listening, reflecting, and crafting each act so that these whispers and lights and moments of warmth can keep reaching new hearts in their own quiet evenings. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Your support, however small, becomes another kind of shared warmth that allows the stories to continue unfolding gently for others who need them. In this way, the final chill we have spoken of never has the last word. The small acts of care, both the ones we remember from long ago and the ones we offer today, keep their own quiet fire burning. They remind us that the human heart was made to give and receive warmth, even when the air around it grows cold. And so the light and the warmth move forward together, one gentle breath at a time, into every evening that still waits to hear them. As the first soft rumble of distant thunder rolls across the hills, a young woman lies awake in her narrow bunk, her hand resting on a small photograph she keeps pressed against her chest like a secret. The barack is filled with the slow breathing of many souls trying to find rest, but her own breath comes in careful, quiet waves that she tries to keep steady. She has been told that tomorrow will bring a different kind of day, one that has been chosen for her by others she has never met and whose faces she cannot picture. Her private fear is a gentle thing, not a scream but a steady ache behind her ribs that rises and falls with each thought of what might lie ahead. She wonders if the path will lead her back to this same wooden bed with its thin blanket, or if it will take her somewhere from which there is no returning to the faces she loves and the life she once knew. She thinks of her home, of the way the morning light used to fall across the kitchen table in golden patches, of the sound of her family moving through the rooms with the easy familiarity of people who belong together. The memory wraps around her like a thin shawl against the cold, offering a small warmth that she holds onto with everything she has. In the bunk next to hers, an older woman has been watching with eyes that have learned to notice the things others try to hide. She has little to offer, but she has saved a small piece of bread from her own portion, hiding it in the folds of her sleeve through the long day. Now, as the night deepens and the first drops of rain begin to tap against the roof, she reaches across the gap and places the bread in the young woman's open hand. The bread is rough and dry, but the older woman's fingers linger for a moment longer than necessary, a silent message passing between them in the darkness. It is a kindness that asks for nothing in return, a gift given simply because it was needed. It says, in the language of those who have nothing left but their hearts, that even here, even now, one person can still choose to ease another's burden, to make the waiting a little less lonely. The young woman closes her fingers around the bread and the photograph together, feeling the weight of both small treasures. For the first time in many nights, she feels a small spark of warmth in her chest that has nothing to do with the bread itself. She thinks that perhaps she can carry this warmth into the morning, and maybe, if she is able and if the path allows, she can pass a piece of it on to someone else who will need it even more than she does. The storm inside her has not disappeared, but it has been joined by something else, something steady and human and alive. A little farther down the long row of bunks, an old man lies with his eyes open to the darkness above him. He was a teacher in another life, a man who believed in the power of stories to light the way through difficult times, and who once stood before classrooms of children eager to learn about the world. Tonight he is writing a letter in his mind, a letter he has been composing for many nights and will continue to compose for as many nights as he is given. It is addressed to his wife, the woman whose face he sees every time he closes his eyes and whose voice he hears in the quiet moments between thoughts. He tells her about the way the wind moves through the cracks in the walls, how it sometimes carries the scent of rain and reminds him of the storms they weathered together in their little house by the edge of the woods, the ones they faced side by side with nothing but their love and their determination to see the sun return. He writes about the young woman in the next bunk and the bread that was shared without a word, how it reminded him that goodness can still find a way to express itself even when everything else has been taken away. He describes the stars he can see through the high window on clear nights, the same stars that shine over their home, and he promises that he is watching them for both of them, sending his love along the light that travels between them. He adds a line about the way he still hums the old songs under his breath when the nights are too long and the waiting too heavy, the songs she used to sing while she worked in the garden with dirt on her hands and a smile on her face. The letter is long and full of the ordinary love that built their life together, the small daily kindnesses and the deep knowing that comes from years of choosing each other every morning. He knows it will never be folded into an envelope or carried by a postman across the miles. But the writing of it is enough. It keeps his heart connected to hers across all the distance and all the silence that has fallen between them. When he finishes the last line, wishing her a peaceful night and telling her that he carries her with him always, no matter what the morning may bring, a quiet peace settles over his tired body like a soft blanket. The approaching storms of the world feel a little farther away when he is with her in this way, in the safe country of memory and love that no one else can enter. In a corner where three young men share a single bunk to make room for the many others who have nowhere else to rest, the conversation is soft and careful, like a flame protected from the wind. They had been friends at university, studying late into the night over books that made them believe they could understand the world and perhaps even help to mend it. One of them has been told he must be ready in the morning for what has been described only as a necessary examination. The other two do not speak of what that might mean or what might happen after. Instead, they give him the only gift they have left to give, the gift of remembering who he was and who they were together before the world became this place. They speak of the little cafe where the coffee was always too strong and the owner always complained loudly but let them stay anyway because he secretly enjoyed their passionate debates. They laugh quietly, the sound barely more than a breath, about the time they tried to cook a special meal in their small rented room to celebrate the end of exams and nearly set the curtains on fire, filling the hallway with smoke and laughter. They talk about the books they loved most, the ones that made them stay up all night turning pages and arguing about what the stories meant for the way people should live. They recall the river that ran behind their dormitory, how the water was so cold even in the middle of summer that it took their breath away when they jumped in, but they swam anyway, shouting with the pure joy of being young and free and together. For a little while, the barack and the waiting and the unknown mourning are not there at all. There is only the three of them, friends as they have always been and will always be, no matter what paths the days may take. When the one who must go in the morning grows quiet and his eyes grow distant, the others simply sit closer, their shoulders touching in the dark, their presence a steady warmth that needs no words. It is a small act of everyday heroism, this protecting of a friend's spirit with ordinary memories when the present feels too heavy to carry alone. They are saying, without a single word spoken aloud, that whatever the morning brings, he is still one of them, still the person they chose to walk beside through all the years of their lives, still loved and still remembered exactly as he is. These nights of waiting and small kindnesses happened in many barracks, and many camps, as the larger story of the war moved like slow clouds across the sky, decisions made in distant rooms shaping lives in ways no one here could control. They were not recorded in any official papers or mentioned in any reports sent up the chain of command. They did not change the orders that came from far away or the paths that had been laid out for so many innocent lives. But they changed the people who lived them in ways that mattered more than any order could ever understand. A shared story could turn a night of fear into a night of remembering who they had been and who they still were. A piece of bread could become a promise that goodness still existed and could still be given freely. A hand in the dark could say what no voice was allowed to say aloud, that no one had to face the unknown entirely alone. These were the quiet rebellions of the heart, the everyday decisions to remain human when the world around them seemed to ask for something else entirely, something colder and more alone. Not everyone had old friends or family nearby to lean on. For many, the bonds that helped them through the nights were formed right here, in the shared space of waiting and uncertainty. In yet another corner of the long room, two women who had never met before this place sit close together on the edge of a bunk. One of them has been here for many months and has learned the rhythms of survival in small ways. The other arrived only a short time ago and still carries the shock of separation in her eyes. The newer arrival's hands shake slightly as she tries to fold her thin blanket into some shape that might offer a little comfort. The older one notices without being asked and, with gentle movements, helps her smooth the fabric and tuck the edges in neatly. Then she begins to hum, very softly so that only the two of them can hear, a melody from her childhood home in a village where the hills rolled gently and the summers were long. It is a song about the changing seasons, about leaves turning gold and falling and the earth resting through the cold before waking again in the spring. She does not sing the words, only the tune, but the rhythm is steady and kind, like a hand rocking a cradle. The other woman listens, her eyes closed and her breathing slowing to match the gentle rise and fall of the melody. When the song ends, she whispers a thank you so quietly it is almost lost in the sound of the rain on the roof. The two women sit in a silence that feels less empty than it did before, connected now by a thread of shared humanity that was not there an hour earlier. It is another small thread in the hidden tapestry of care, another choice to offer comfort when comfort is needed most and when there is so little left to give. The approaching storm may be personal and different for each of them, but in this moment, they face it together. Two strangers who have become companions in the simple act of one offering a song and the other receiving it with an open heart. As the months passed and the feeling of change grew stronger in the air, these small moments took on even more meaning for those who lived them. There were new sounds sometimes, distant and low like the far-off rumble of a storm that might be moving closer from the edges of the world. New people arrived with tired eyes and stories they shared only in the quietest of whispers when they thought no one else could hear. The routines of the days shifted in small ways that no one could quite explain, but everyone felt in their bones. Yet through it all, the young woman still held her photograph close and carried the memory of the bread like a secret strength. The old teacher still added lines to his endless letter each night, finding new memories to include and new promises to make. The three friends still found ways to speak of rivers and cafes and books and the joy of being young when the darkness allowed and the walls did not listen too closely. Their quiet resilience was built from these threads, woven day after day and night after night. It was the strength to keep caring for one another even when caring seemed to have no power against the forces that moved around them. It was the strength to keep remembering who they were and where they had come from, even when the present tried to erase everything that came before. It was the strength to keep offering what little they had, whether it was a crust of bread, a story, a song, or simply the steady presence of a shoulder to lean against in the dark. It was not a strength that shouted or fought or made itself known to the world outside. It was a strength that simply continued, quietly and steadily, choosing tenderness over forgetting, connection over isolation, and hope over the easy surrender to despair. And in these choices, there was a kind of light that no storm, no matter how dark or how long it lasted, could put out completely. It was the light of a hand reaching out across the space between bunks. It was the light of a memory shared in a whisper that made someone smile for the first time in days. It was the light of a letter written in the heart and sent across invisible miles to someone who would never read it but who lived in it anyway. It was the light of ordinary people finding extraordinary ways to stay connected to their own humanity and to each other, even as the clouds gathered thicker and the path ahead remained unknown and uncertain. These were the lights that burned in the darkness, not because anyone forced them to, but because the human heart, when given even the smallest chance, will always try to find a way to shine. If these stories of private fears met with quiet courage and everyday kindness have found their way into your heart tonight, if they have reminded you that even in the most difficult and uncertain times, the human spirit can still choose to reach out, to remember, and to care, then I would like to invite you to walk a little farther with me along this path of remembrance. Just as the people in those barracks formed small circles of care and connection to face their own approaching storms together, I believe that we can form a similar circle here, a community of listeners and storytellers who keep these personal accounts alive and honor the quiet strength they reveal. That is why I warmly and sincerely recommend that you visit my Patreon page, where you can join me for free podcasts that explore these deeply human journeys in even greater depth and with the time and care each story deserves. There, we can sit with the details and the emotions a little longer, letting them speak to us without rushing. You will also find raw and unblurred sections of the documentary, where the places and the faces and the quiet spaces can be seen exactly as they are, allowing the full truth and the full humanity of these experiences to reach you without anything softened or hidden between you and the reality the survivors lived. And if this work of preserving and sharing these important stories of resilience and kindness resonates with you and brings you a sense of connection and peace, you can support it further through the tip jar, contributing whatever feels right to help me continue bringing these voices forward with the gentleness and respect they have always deserved. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. When we choose to support one another in this way, we continue the same quiet chain of care and heroism that began in those barracks and those nights long ago. We pass the bread from one hand to another. We share the story that turns fear into memory. We hum the song that makes the silence less empty. We hold the hand across the years and the miles, just as they did. And in doing so, we help ensure that the memory of those who found light in the darkness, who chose kindness when kindness was hardest, continues to offer its gentle strength to us here and now, and to all who will come after us, long after the storms have moved on and the sky has opened once more to clear, peaceful nights filled with stars. In the soft gray light before the sun has fully risen, the sound of metal shifting against metal drifts across the quiet camp, and a young woman who has been holding her breath for longer than she can remember feels something stir deep inside her chest, a question she has almost stopped allowing herself to ask. She sits on the edge of the narrow bunk where she has spent so many nights, her fingers wrapped around the small photograph she has kept hidden against her skin. Outside, the voices are different from the ones she has grown used to. They speak in rhythms that belong to another world, a world she has not touched for so long that it feels like a story someone once told her. Her private fear rises gently, not sharp but steady. Is this the morning she has been waiting for, or is it another dream that will fade when she opens her eyes fully? She thinks of the faces in the photograph, of the kitchen table where the light once fell in golden patches, and she wonders if those faces are still waiting somewhere beyond the fence. The gate has not moved yet, but the sound of it being touched from the outside is enough to make her heart beat in a new way, a way that feels both like fear and like the beginning of something she has no name for. Nearby, the older woman who once placed bread in her hand now rests a gentle palm on her shoulder. No words pass between them. There is only the shared stillness, the shared listening. When the gate finally gives way and swings open with a slow, creaking sound that seems to echo through every barack, the older woman's hand tightens just a little, a silent message that says they will step forward together if the young woman is ready. The first figure to appear is a man in a uniform that does not belong to this place. He moves carefully, as if he understands that sudden movements might frighten those who have lived inside these walls for so long. He carries a canteen and, without rushing, he kneels near the doorway and offers it to the first person who reaches him. His eyes are tired but kind, and when the young woman takes the canteen, his hand brushes hers for the briefest moment, a touch that carries no demand, only the simple offering of water. She drinks slowly, the coolness spreading through her in a way that feels almost too real to believe. In that small sip, something inside her begins to loosen, not all at once, but enough for her to notice the sky above the open gate, the way it stretches wider than she has allowed herself to remember. A little farther along the row, the old teacher who has been composing his letter night after night now sits very still, his eyes fixed on the open space where the gate used to stand. For the first time, he allows himself to imagine that the letter he has been writing in his mind might one day be written on real paper, with real ink, and carried by real hands to the woman whose face he has carried in his own. He thinks of the words he will add now that the gate is unbarred, that he is still the man she married, that the storms they faced apart have not changed the garden they once tended together, that he has seen the same stars she has seen and has sent his love along their light every night. The thought is quiet and steady, not a shout of joy but a gentle unfolding, like a letter being smoothed flat after being folded for too long. He does not rush to stand. He simply breathes, and in the breathing he feels the first fragile thread of a future he had almost stopped imagining. Close by, the three young friends who once shared stories of rivers and cafes now move as one toward the open gate. One of them has grown too weak to walk without support, and the other two take his arms, one on each side, their shoulders steady beneath his weight. They do not speak of what lies beyond the fence. They simply take one step, then another, matching their pace to the slowest among them. When they reach the threshold, they pause together, not because they are afraid, but because they want to make sure no one is left behind in the long room they are leaving. One of them glances back, his eyes searching the shadows for any face that might still need a hand or a word. It is a small act of everyday heroism, this refusing to let the opening of the gate become a reason to forget those who cannot yet move as quickly. They step through together, and for the first time and longer than any of them can measure, the wind touches their faces without a fence between them and the sky. In the space that opens beyond the gate, two women who once sat close in the dark now walk side by side, the older one's arm steady around the younger. The older woman begins to hum again, the same gentle melody from her village that she offered on the night before the gate moved. The tune rises softly, carried by the morning air, and the younger woman listens as she did before, her breathing slowing to match the rhythm. They do not hurry. They simply place one foot in front of the other, feeling the earth beneath them in a way that feels both strange and familiar, like a path they once knew but had almost forgotten. When they reach a patch of grass where the sun has begun to warm the ground, they sit together, and the older woman continues humming until the last note fades into the open air. It is another small thread of connection, another choice to offer comfort even now, when the gate no longer stands between them and whatever comes next. Not far from where they rest, a man who has carried a stub of pencil and a scrap of paper hidden for longer than he can say now sits on the grass with trembling hands. He smooths the paper against his knee and begins to write the first real words of the letter he has been composing in his mind for so many nights. His handwriting is shaky, the letters uneven, but he writes anyway. He writes to his sister, whose name he has spoken only in whispers, telling her that he is outside now, that the gate has opened, that he is still here and still thinking of the home they once shared. He does not know if she will ever read the words. He does not even know if she is still waiting somewhere in the world beyond the fence. But the act of writing them on real paper, with the sky above him and no bar across the gate, is its own quiet act of resilience. It is his way of saying that the story he has carried inside is not finished, that even in the first uncertain hours of freedom, he can still reach toward the people he loves with the only tools he has left. These first moments beyond the unbarred gate were not filled with loud celebration or sudden release. They were filled instead with small, careful movements and quieter feelings. The private fears did not vanish when the gate opened. They changed shape, becoming questions about what the world outside would ask of them now, about whether home still existed in the way they remembered it, about how to carry the weight of all that had been lost while learning to walk on ground that no longer felt like it belonged to someone else. Yet even in the uncertainty, the small kindnesses continued. A soldier from the world beyond the fence knelt beside someone who could not yet stand and spoke in a voice that needed no translation, offering water and a blanket with the same gentle hands that had helped open the gate. A prisoner who had found strength in the long nights now turned back to help another who was still inside, guiding them forward one slow step at a time. These were not grand gestures. They were the everyday decisions to keep caring, to keep noticing, to keep offering what little remained to give. The unbarred gate did not erase the nights that had come before. It simply allowed the light to reach the places where light had been kept out for so long. The young woman with the photograph still held it close, but now she could look at it in the open air, tracing the faces with fingers that no longer had to hide what they loved. The old teacher still carried his letter in his heart, but now he could imagine the day when real paper and real ink would carry his words the rest of the way home. The friend still walked at the pace of the slowest among them, and the two women still hummed when the silence grew too wide. The man with the pencil still wrote, even though his hand shook and the future remained unknown. These were the quiet ways they stepped into the new morning, carrying their private fears and their small resiliences with them, one careful breath at a time. If these stories of gates opening and hearts taking their first cautious steps into the light have touched something gentle inside you, if they have reminded you that even after long seasons of waiting, the human spirit can still find ways to offer kindness and to keep moving forward, then I would like to offer you a way to carry more of these hidden layers of history with you. Just as the small, secret acts of care inside the camps were like quiet operations that helped so many survive until the gates could finally be unbarred, there were other shadow stories across the wider war, operations kept hidden that shaped the course of events in ways we are still discovering. That is why I warmly invite you, as a friend who has walked through these personal journeys with you, to sign up for my free email newsletter. As my gift to you, you will receive the ebook The Shadow War, 5 Top Secret Operations That Shaped World War II, along with weekly deep dives into the personal stories and hidden histories that continue to light our understanding of endurance, resilience, and the quiet ways people reclaim their lives after the darkest times. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. In signing up and in continuing to listen, we become part of the same gentle chain that began when the gates first moved and the first careful steps were taken into the open air. We pass the water, we write the letter, we hum the song, we help the one who cannot yet walk alone. And in doing so, we help ensure that the memory of those first mornings beyond the unbarred gates continues to offer its quiet hope to us here, and to all who will come after, long after the fences have fallen and the sky has opened wide above the paths that lead forward. In the soft light of an afternoon that no longer belongs to the old walls, a young woman sits on a patch of grass beneath an open sky and holds her photograph close, feeling the gentle weight of memories that have traveled with her across the unbarred gate. She traces the faded edges with one finger, the way she used to do in the darkness when the photograph was her only companion. Now the light falls freely across the paper, yet the faces within it still carry the quiet question of what they endured while she was away. Her private fear rises softly, not as a storm but as a slow ripple across still water. Will the memories of the place she has left ever grow gentle enough to hold without trembling? She thinks of the kitchen table from long ago and wonders if it still stands in the same spot, or if the light falls differently there now. The photograph feels both heavier and lighter in her hands, as if it has taken on the weight of everything that happened between the moment it was taken and this open afternoon. Yet even in the ripple of fear, she notices the grass beneath her, the way it bends without resistance, and she lets her breath match its quiet movement. Nearby, the older woman who once shared bread in the dark now sits with her, their shoulders almost touching. She does not ask what the young woman is remembering. She simply offers the warmth of her presence, the same steady presence that once crossed the narrow space between bunks. When a memory rises too sharply in the young woman's eyes, the older woman reaches over and rests a hand on her arm, a touch that says without words that some scars are carried together. It is a small kindness that costs nothing but the willingness to stay close when the past steps forward uninvited. The young woman leans into the touch, and for a moment the photograph in her hands feels less alone, as if the faces within it can rest a little easier knowing that kindness has followed them into this new light. A little farther along the gentle slope of the field, the old teacher who once wrote letters only in his mind now holds a real piece of paper. His hands are still slow, but they move with a purpose that was not there before the gate opened. He writes to his wife, adding the lines he could only imagine in the darkness, that he has seen the sky without bars, that he has felt the wind move freely across his face, that the garden they once tended together is still alive in the way he remembers the stars. He writes that the memories of the place he has left live inside him like old scars that ache when the light changes, yet they have not taken away the love he carries for her. Each word is placed carefully, as if he is building a small bridge across the distance that still remains between them. When he finishes a page, he folds it gently and tucks it into his pocket, close to his heart. The act of writing does not erase the scars, but it gives them a place to rest, a place where they can be spoken to instead of only carried in silence. Close by, the three young friends who once shared stories of rivers and cafes now sit together on the grass, their backs resting against the trunk of a tree that has no fence around it. One of them still needs support to walk far, and the others stay near, offering their presence as they once offered their memories in the dark. They speak of small things now, the way the leaves move above them, the taste of bread that does not have to be hidden, the sound of voices that do not carry orders. When one of them grows quiet and his eyes turn inward toward a memory that has surfaced without warning, another simply places a hand on his shoulder and begins to hum a fragment of an old song they all once knew. It is not the same melody the women hummed, but it carries the same gentle intention. The quiet returns, but it is a shared quiet now, shaped by the choice to stay present with one another even when the scars of memory rise like unexpected waves. They do not try to push the memories away. They simply let them come and go, like clouds that pass across the open sky without taking the light with them. In the shade of the same tree, the two women who once listened to a hummed song in the barracks now rest together, the older one's arm still steady around the younger. The older woman begins the melody again, very softly, the same tune from her village that once traveled between bunks in the darkness. The younger woman closes her eyes and lets the notes settle around her like a familiar blanket. When the song ends, she speaks for the first time about a memory that has been waiting quietly inside her, the way her mother used to hum the same melody while working in the garden. The words are few, but they are enough. The older woman listens without interrupting, her hand resting lightly on the younger woman's back. It is another small thread of connection, another everyday act of heroism in the simple choice to hear someone else's memory without needing to fix it or explain it away. The scars remain, but they are no longer carried in complete silence. Not far from where they sit, the man who once wrote his first real letter with a trembling hand now walks slowly along the edge of the field, a new scrap of paper folded in his pocket. He has added more lines since that first afternoon, words that speak of the open sky and the way the memories sometimes feel like old photographs that have been left too long in the sun. He writes that he is learning to walk without looking back at every shadow, yet he still carries the faces of those who did not step through the gate with him. The writing does not take the scars away, but it gives them a voice that can travel beyond the field, toward whatever home may still be waiting. When he stops to rest, he smooths the paper against his knee and reads the words he has written so far, as if checking that they still hold true in the changing light. It is a quiet resilience, this returning to the page day after day, choosing to shape the memory rather than letting it shape him entirely. These afternoons in the open air were filled with such small movements and quieter reckonings. The scars of memory did not fade when the gates opened. They traveled with the survivors into the new light, showing themselves in sudden stillness when a sound echoed too closely, in the careful way hands reached for photographs or letters, in the gentle pauses between words when a story rose too close to the surface. Yet the same scars also carried the proof of survival. They were the quiet reminders that the heart had endured, that kindness had been offered even when there was little left to give, that letters had been written in the mind long before they could be written on paper. The private fears that came with freedom were not louder than the fears that had lived inside the old walls. They were simply different. The fear that the memories might one day grow too faint to honor those who were no longer there, the fear that a new place might never feel like home again, the fear that joy itself might feel like a forgetting. These fears rose and settled like the wind across the grass, never fully gone but never fully in control either. In the quiet spaces between the memories, the small kindnesses continued to appear. A relief worker with gentle hands offered a blanket to someone who had woken from a troubled sleep, speaking in a voice that asked nothing in return. A fellow survivor shared a crust of bread without being asked, the same simple offering that had once crossed the space between bunks now crossing the space between new mornings. Someone who had once hummed in the darkness now taught the melody to a child who had arrived after the gate opened, passing the song forward as if it were a small light that could be carried into whatever days came next. These were not large gestures meant to erase the scars. They were the everyday decisions to keep noticing one another, to keep offering what little remained, to keep choosing connection over the easier path of turning inward. The heroism lived in the continuing, in the refusal to let the weight of memory become a reason to stop reaching out. The scars of memory, carried in these gentle ways, became their own kind of map. They showed where the heart had been and where it was still learning to go. They did not demand to be forgotten. They asked only to be held with the same care that had once been offered across narrow bunks and whispered conversations in the dark. The young woman still traced her photograph in the open light. The old teacher still folded his letters close to his heart. The friends still matched their pace to the slowest among them. The women still listened to the hummed melody when the silence grew wide. The man with the paper still added lines when the memories rose. And in each of these small acts, the scars were given a place to rest, a place where they could be carried without needing to be hidden, and where the light of the open sky could fall across them without taking their meaning away. If these stories of carrying the scars of memory with quiet grace and small kindnesses have found a place in your own heart, if they have reminded you that even the deepest marks left by difficult times can be held with tenderness and shared with others, then I would like to offer you a gentle way to stay connected to this history a little longer. Just as the survivors carried their memories forward like quiet testaments to endurance and the small heroisms that helped them step into new days, there are tangible pieces of that same history still available to hold and to witness. My friend, if you feel moved to explore beautiful WW2 memorabilia that honors the courage and resilience we have been speaking of, Or if you would like to settle in with a story of bravery and turning points like the film Midway on Prime Video, I warmly invite you to visit the secure links I have placed in the description below. These are ways to sit with the larger tapestry of human strength that includes the personal scars and quiet lights we have been exploring together. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. In this way, we keep the memory of those who carried their scars with such gentle strength alive, passing the light of their quiet resilience forward through stories, through shared melodies, through letters written one careful line at a time, and through the small kindnesses that continue to connect us across the years, long after the gates have opened and the sky has grown wide above the paths that lead onward. In a small room where the light falls softly through an open window, a young woman sits with a blank page before her, her fingers resting lightly on the edge as if the paper itself might carry memories too heavy to hold. She has carried the photograph for so long that its edges have grown soft against her skin. Now, with the page waiting, she feels the quiet trial of conscience begin to rise, not as a demand but as a gentle question that settles in her chest. Should these words be written, or are some things meant to remain in the quiet places where only the heart can visit them? Her private fear moves slowly, like a shadow across the floor when the light changes. She wonders if putting the memories into ink will make them more real than they already are, or if it might somehow lessen the weight for those who never had the chance to speak. She thinks of the faces in the photograph and of the older woman who once placed bread in her hand without asking for anything in return. The memory of that small kindness steadies her fingers. She lifts the pencil and writes the first line, not of what was done to her, but of the hand that reached across the narrow space between bunks when the night felt endless. The words come slowly, each one placed with care, as if she is building a small bridge between the past and this quiet room where the window stands open. In the same gentle light, not far from where she writes, the older woman who shared that bread now sits with her own thoughts. She has no paper before her, yet her conscience moves in its own quiet way. She remembers the nights when she saved a crust for someone else, and she wonders if those small choices were enough, or if there were moments when she could have done more. The trial is not loud. It lives in the way her eyes grow distant when the wind moves through the open window in a certain way. Yet when she sees the young woman bent over the page, she rises and crosses the room with the same steady presence she once carried between bunks. She places a cup of warm tea beside the blank page without speaking. The gesture says what words cannot: you do not have to carry this alone. The young woman looks up, and in that glance something shifts. The fear does not leave, but it is joined by the simple knowledge that another heart has chosen to stay close while the words find their shape. It is a small kindness that costs nothing but presence, yet it turns the trial of conscience into something shared rather than solitary. A little farther down the quiet hallway, the old teacher who once wrote letters only in his mind now sits at a wooden table with real paper spread before him. His conscience has its own rhythm. He has added many lines since the gate opened, yet he pauses often, the pencil hovering as he considers what else must be said. He thinks of the young men who once shared stories of rivers and cafes, and of the way they walked together when one could not manage alone. He writes of them now, not of the darkness they endured, but of the light they protected in one another through small laughter and steady shoulders. The words feel like a promise he is keeping to those who stepped through the gate beside him. When he finishes a page, he reads it back in a whisper, as if testing whether the truth he carries can travel safely into the world beyond this room. The trial of conscience does not ask him to forget. It asks only that he choose, with each line, how to honor what was lost while still reaching toward what might still be found. He folds the page carefully and places it with the others, close to his heart, where the letters have always lived. Close by, the three young friends who once matched their pace to the slowest among them now gather around a small table in the same gentle light. One of them has been asked to speak of what he remembers, and the trial of conscience sits heavily in his eyes. He fears that his words might bring pain to those who listen, or that they might not be enough to honor the ones who are no longer here. The other two do not push him. They simply sit with him, their shoulders touching as they once touched in the dark. One of them begins to speak of the river they once swam in, the cold water that took their breath away yet left them laughing. The memory rises between them like a small island of ordinary joy. The one who must speak listens, and after a while he adds his own fragment, the way the sun felt on their faces that last afternoon before everything changed. It is not the full story he has been asked to tell, yet it is a beginning. The others listen without interrupting, their presence a quiet form of everyday heroism. They are choosing to walk beside him through this new trial just as they walked beside him through the old one, offering the gift of shared memory when the conscience asks for courage. In the corner of the same room, the two women who once hummed a village melody in the darkness now sit near the open window. The younger one holds a piece of paper the young woman has given her, a page with only a few lines written so far. Her conscience moves in the hesitation of her hand. She wants to add something of her own, perhaps the way the older woman's song once traveled between bunks like a thread of light, yet she fears the words might not do justice to the quiet strength that song carried. The older woman notices the pause and begins to hum again, very softly, the same melody that once eased the waiting. She does not tell the younger woman what to write. She simply offers the tune as a companion while the pencil moves. When a line is added, the older woman nods gently, her hand resting on the table between them. It is another small kindness, this staying present while another heart wrestles with what can and cannot be said. The melody continues until the page holds a few more words, and the trial of conscience feels a little less alone for having been witnessed in silence and song. Not far from where they sit, the man who once wrote his first real letter with trembling hands now walks slowly along a path that leads away from the small cluster of buildings. He carries a folded paper in his pocket, the latest page he has added to the letter that has grown longer with each passing day. His conscience has taught him that some truths must be spoken even when the speaking is difficult. He has begun to share small portions of what he has written with others who carry similar scars, not as a demand that they read, but as an offering that says you are not the only one who remembers. When he meets someone whose eyes hold the same quiet weight, he sometimes takes the paper from his pocket and reads a single line aloud. The words are simple, a memory of bread shared, of a hand reached across darkness, of a sky scene without bars. He does not read the heavier parts. He offers only what might bring a moment of connection. The listener often nods or places a hand on his arm, and in that touch the trial of conscience becomes lighter for both of them. It is a quiet resilience, this choosing to carry the truth forward one gentle line at a time, trusting that small offerings can build bridges where larger ones might crumble under their own weight. These quiet rooms and open windows held many such trials of conscience in the days and weeks after the gates had been unbarred. They were not trials held in grand halls with many voices. They were the personal reckonings that happened when a pencil touched paper, when one survivor chose to stay close while another struggled to speak, when a melody was offered instead of advice, when a single line was read aloud and met with a nod of understanding. The private fears that accompanied these trials were the same fears that had lived inside the old walls, only now they wore different shapes, the fear that speaking might somehow betray those who could no longer speak. The fear that the words would fall short of the truth they tried to carry, the fear that the conscience itself might never find rest. Yet these fears were met, again and again, with the same small kindnesses that had once crossed the space between bunks. A cup of tea placed beside a blank page. A shoulder offered without words. A song hummed while another heart decided what could be written. A story of a river shared when the present felt too heavy. These were the everyday heroisms that turned the trial of conscience into something that could be carried together rather than alone. The scars of memory had not disappeared, but they had found new companions in these gentle reckonings. The young woman still traced the edges of her photograph, yet now the page before her held a few lines that spoke of kindness rather than only of loss. The old teacher still folded his letters close to his heart, yet now those letters included the names of those who had walked beside him. The three friends still matched their pace to one another, yet now their conversations sometimes turned to the words one of them might one day speak aloud. The two women still listened to the hummed melody, yet now the melody sometimes carried the beginning of a story that had waited a long time to be told. The man with the paper still added lines each day, yet now he sometimes shared one of those lines with another who carried similar weight. In each of these small movements, the conscience was not conquered. It was simply given room to breathe, a place where truth and kindness could sit together without one demanding the silence of the other. If these stories of the quiet trials that live inside the heart, of consciences that wrestle gently with what can and cannot be spoken, have touched something deep within you, then perhaps you will understand why I want to offer you a way to witness more of the unseen layers that these personal reckonings tried to bring into the light. Just as the survivors faced the trial of carrying their inner truths across the threshold from darkness into open windows and blank pages, there are parts of this history that remain unseen on ordinary platforms, raw images and moments that could not be shown here yet deserve to be held with care. My friend, if you feel the same pull to honor the full depth of these human experiences, I warmly invite you to visit my Gumroad page through the secure link in the description below, where you can access a special digital collection of unseen, raw images and videos from the war that were too restricted to share on this platform. These are offered as a quiet companion to the stories we have been exploring together, a way to sit with the fuller truth in the same gentle spirit that guided those who chose to write, to listen, and to remember. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. In this way, we continue the same quiet chain of care that began when a hand reached across a narrow space in the dark and has continued through every open window and every careful line written since. We honor the trials of conscience by choosing to witness, to listen, and to carry the unseen forward with the same tenderness that once turned fear into shared breath, one small offering at a time, long after the pages have been filled and the windows have been left open to the light that follows. In the hush that falls over a small room at the end of a long day, a young woman sits by a window and listens to the silence, hearing within it the faint echo of a voice that once offered bread without a word. The page she has been writing lies open on the table beside her, a few lines catching the last light from the window. She does not read them again. She simply sits with the quiet, letting the echoes rise and settle like leaves drifting to the ground. One echo is the older woman's hand resting on her arm when words would not come. Another is the sound of the gate moving on its hinges, not as a threat but as a slow opening. Her private fear in these moments is gentle, the kind that lives in the space between breaths, that the silence might one day grow too wide, or that the echoes might grow too faint to guide her when the day feels uncertain. She reaches for the photograph she still keeps close and traces its edge with one finger. The faces within it do not speak, yet they fill the hush with a presence that needs no sound. She closes her eyes and lets the echo of the older woman's quiet offering settle around her like a shawl. In that settling, the fear loosens its hold, and the silence becomes something she can share with the memory rather than something she must face alone. Not far from where she sits, the older woman who once crossed the narrow space between bunks now tends a small patch of earth outside the window. She moves slowly, her hands pressing seeds into the soil with the same care she once used to save a crust of bread. The silence here is different from the silence inside the old walls. It holds the sound of wind moving through leaves and the distant call of a bird that has no fence to cross. Yet within that quiet, echoes still rise. She remembers the young woman's eyes on the night the bread was shared, the way they held both fear and a small spark of trust. Her private fear now is that she might not have enough left to offer in this new life, that the kindnesses she once gave so freely might have been used up in the long nights. When she straightens and sees the young woman at the window, she lifts one hand in a simple wave. It is not a grand gesture. It is only the acknowledgement that they are both here, both carrying echoes, both choosing to tend what little they have been given. The wave is returned, and in that exchange the silence feels less empty. It becomes a space where two hearts can rest without needing to fill it with words. Inside the small cluster of rooms, the old teacher sits at his table with the latest page of his letter spread before him. The pencil moves more steadily now, though he still pauses often to listen to the quiet around him. The echoes in this silence are the voices of the young men who once shared stories of rivers and cafes. He writes of them again, adding how they walked together when one could not manage the pace alone. His private fear is that the letter, no matter how many pages it grows, might never reach the woman whose face he carries in his heart. Yet he continues, because the act of writing itself has become a way to keep the echoes alive rather than letting them fade into the hush. When he finishes the page, he reads it back in a whisper, the same way he once whispered promises to the stars he could see through the high window. The words settle into the silence like seeds into soil. He folds the page and places it with the others, close to his chest, where the echoes can rest without needing to be spoken aloud. The fear does not leave, but it is joined by the quiet knowledge that some things are kept alive simply by the choosing to remember them in the hush. Close by, the three young friends sit together on a low bench beneath a tree whose leaves move gently in the evening air. The silence between them is comfortable now, shaped by all the words they have already shared and all the ones they have chosen to leave unspoken. One of them still walks with a slower step, and the others match their rhythm without thinking. Their private fears rise in these quiet moments like distant ripples, that the life they are building might never feel as full as the one they once imagined by the river, or that the echoes of laughter they once protected might one day grow too faint to reach. Yet when one of them grows still and his gaze turns inward, another simply shifts closer on the bench until their shoulders touch. It is the same touch they once offered in the darkness, only now it happens beneath an open sky. No words are needed. The silence holds the echo of their old friendship and the new strength it has become. They stay there until the light fades, three hearts resting in the same quiet rhythm, each carrying the others through the echoes without asking for anything in return. In the room where the window stays open longest, the two women sit side by side on a simple wooden bench. The older one begins the village melody again, very softly, the same tune that once traveled between bunks when the night felt endless. The younger woman listens with her eyes closed, letting the notes fill the silence like light filling a room at dawn. Her private fear in these moments is that the melody might one day be the only thing left of the kindness that once held them both. Yet when the song ends, she reaches over and takes the older woman's hand, a touch that says the echo is not fading because they are still here to carry it together. They sit like that for a long while, two hearts sharing the hush without needing to speak of the past or the future. The melody lingers in the air even after the last note has gone, an echo that belongs to both of them now, a small thread of sound that turns the silence into something warm rather than empty. A little farther along the path that leads away from the cluster of rooms, the man who once wrote his first real letter with trembling hands now walks alone in the fading light. He carries the latest page folded in his pocket, though he has not yet decided where it will go. The silence around him holds many echoes, the sound of the gate opening, the feel of grass beneath his feet for the first time, the quiet nod of another who listened when he read a single line aloud. His private fear is that the letter might grow too long for anyone to carry, or that the truths he has shaped into words might one day feel heavier than the silence they once lived in. Yet he continues to add lines each evening, because the writing itself has become a way to honor the echoes rather than let them settle into forgetting. When he stops beneath a tree whose branches move like gentle hands, he takes the page from his pocket and reads one line to the open air. The words are simple, a memory of bread shared across darkness, of a hand reached without asking, of a sky seen without bars. He speaks them into the silence, and for a moment the echoes answer back in the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird. He folds the page again and continues walking, the letter growing heavier and lighter at the same time, carried by the quiet choice to keep the echoes alive one gentle line at a time. These evenings in the small rooms and along the quiet paths were filled with such moments of listening and carrying. The echoes in the silence were not loud. They did not demand to be named or explained. They simply rose when the day grew still, bringing with them the memory of a hand offered in the dark, a song hummed between bunks, a story of a river shared when words were too heavy, a letter written one careful line at a time. The private fears that accompanied these echoes were the same fears that had lived inside the old walls, only gentler now, shaped by the open sky and the small kindnesses that had followed them across the gate. The fear that the silence might grow too wide was met with a wave from across a patch of earth. The fear that the echoes might fade was met with a hand resting on a shoulder or a melody offered without words. The fear that the truth might be too heavy to carry alone was met with the simple presence of another heart choosing to stay close while the page was filled or the line was spoken. These were the everyday heroisms that turned the silence into a space where memory and kindness could rest together, where the echoes could be heard without needing to be answered, and where the quiet resilience of continuing to live became its own gentle reply to all that had come before. The larger world moved on in its own rhythms, yet within these small rooms and along these quiet paths the echoes remained, carried by those who had learned that silence does not mean forgetting. It means making room for what has been and what still is, for the bread shared and the letter written, for the song hummed and the shoulder offered, for the photograph traced and the page filled one slow word at a time. The young woman still sat by the window with her photograph and her open page. The older woman still tended the small patch of earth and lifted her hand in greeting. The old teacher still folded his letters close to his heart and read them back in a whisper. The three friends still matched their pace beneath the moving leaves. The two women still listened to the melody that turned silence into warmth. The man with the letter still spoke one line into the open air and continued walking. In each of these small acts, the echoes found a place to rest, a place where they could be carried forward without demanding more than the heart was ready to give. If these quiet stories of echoes rising in the silence, of private fears met with small kindnesses and the gentle choice to keep carrying what matters most, have brought you a sense of peace and connection across the years, then I would like to offer you a simple way to help these echoes continue for others who need them. Just as the survivors in these stories found strength in the quiet persistence of small offerings and shared presence, the work of bringing these personal journeys to light requires its own quiet persistence and care. My friend, if you feel moved to support the time and heart that goes into crafting these stories so they can reach more people with the gentleness they deserve, I warmly invite you to visit my Ko-Fi page through the secure link in the description below, where you can leave a small tip as low as $1 to help sustain this work. Your support means I can keep exploring these human threads with the same attention and respect, turning echoes into words that offer comfort and remembrance to anyone who listens. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. In this way, we become part of the same quiet chain that has carried the echoes forward from those small rooms and open paths into the present moment. We offer what we can, we listen to what rises in the hush, and we choose to keep the light of these stories alive one gentle breath, one shared silence, one small act of care at a time, long after the pages have been turned and the windows have been left open to whatever echoes the next evening may bring. A single thread from a mother's shawl can still carry the warmth of a kitchen long after the hands that wove it are gone. In the quiet places of remembrance, these threads do not shout. They simply remain, soft against the fingers of memory, holding the shape of a face, the sound of a laugh, the scent of bread cooling on a windowsill. They belong to people who lived through days when so much was taken, yet something small and living refused to let go. There was a young woman who kept such a thread. Before the trains came, her mother had pressed a strip of faded cloth into her palm and said only, "Keep this near you when you miss the garden." The cloth was ordinary, the stitches uneven where her mother's eyes had grown tired, but the little flowers along the edge had been made with care. In the camp, when the long hours of the day ended and the body was left to rest on wooden planks, she would reach inside her sleeve and find the thread with her fingertips. She never spoke of it. She simply traced the petals, one by one, and in that small motion the garden returned for a moment. The sun on the leaves, the sound of her little brother chasing chickens, the way her mother hummed while hanging laundry. These were not grand memories. They were the ordinary ones that made a life feel like home. Even on nights when sleep stayed far away and the heart wondered whether anyone outside still carried her name, the thread answered with its quiet presence. It said, without words, that she had been loved before all of this, and that love had not been asked permission to stay. Nearby, in the same long barack, an older man noticed the way her fingers moved in the dark. He had no thread of his own, but he remembered how his own daughter used to fall asleep holding the corner of his coat. One evening he saved a corner of his bread, no larger than a child's palm, and placed it gently on the edge of her blanket when no one else was watching. He did not speak. He only nodded once, as if to say the gift was not from him but from all the fathers who could not be there. She ate it slowly, tasting not just the bread but the kindness that had traveled across the narrow space between two strangers. In the morning she left a single stitch of thread on his blanket in return, a tiny loop no one else would notice. It was their secret language, two people reminding each other that care could still be given even when everything else felt taken. Farther down the same row, a father carried a different kind of thread. He had no cloth, only the words of a letter he wrote every night inside his mind to the daughter he had not seen since she was small. Each evening, after the lights had dimmed and the breathing around him had grown heavy with exhaustion, he would begin the letter again. My little one, it always started, today I saw a bird on the wire outside the window. It stayed for a long time. I told it about you. He described the color of the sky that morning, the way the light fell across the faces of the people he worked beside, the small kindness of a stranger who had shared a story about a village festival from long ago. He never wrote the words on paper. There was no paper. But he stitched them carefully into his memory so that if the day ever came when he could speak them aloud, they would be whole. After the war, when he found his daughter safe in another country, he spoke the letters at last. They sat together at a kitchen table while rain tapped the window, and the words that had lived only in his mind for years became real between them. The letter did not erase what had happened. It simply placed something gentle beside it. These small acts were not loud. They did not change the course of anything outside the narrow space where they occurred. Yet they were a form of everyday courage that asked nothing in return. A woman who had once been a teacher began to hum old lullabies under her breath when she noticed others could not sleep. She did not sing loudly. She simply let the melody drift, soft as breath, so that anyone nearby who wished to hear it could borrow a little comfort. A young man who had lost his brother quietly began to tell the brother's favorite jokes to the person lying next to him, changing the names so the stories could belong to anyone who needed them. In the telling, both the teller and the listener remembered that laughter had once been ordinary and might be ordinary again. The medical questions that came during the day were asked in rooms that held no kindness, yet even there the threads sometimes found a way to travel. A prisoner who had been called in early would return later and, without being asked, describe the sky he had seen through a high window, or the way a nurse's hands had trembled for just a moment when no one important was watching. These details were offered like small gifts, reminders that the world outside the room still contained ordinary things. The listener would hold the words the way the young woman held her thread, turning them over until they felt familiar enough to keep. In this way, fragments of gentleness passed from one person to another, invisible to anyone who was not looking for them. When the camps were finally opened, the threads did not disappear. They traveled with the survivors into new countries, new kitchens, new lives that sometimes felt too bright after so much gray. Some people sewed the old threads into new garments for their children, so that a piece of what had been carried in secret could now rest against a small shoulder. Others began to write the letters they had only spoken in their minds, filling pages with the ordinary details they had once recited to stay alive. Grandchildren would sit on laps and hear stories about a garden that no longer existed, or a bird that had stayed on a wire for a long time, or a piece of bread given without a word. These were not stories meant to frighten. There were stories meant to keep the shape of love from fraying. The history of those years is often told through the things that were done in the name of questions. Yet the threads remind us that the questions never reached the part of a person that chose to hum a lullaby, or to save a corner of bread, or to compose a letter to a child who might never hear it. Those choices belonged to the people themselves. They were the quiet proof that even when the body was asked to give more than it should, the heart could still offer something of its own. If these threads have settled softly around you while we have sat together, and you find yourself wishing to stay a little longer with the letters that were never written on paper, the lullabies hummed in the dark, and the small kindnesses that were passed from hand to hand without anyone asking why, then I would like to offer you a gentle place to continue. Over on Patreon, I share extended podcasts where these personal accounts can unfold without hurry, where the full letters and remembered conversations are read in their own quiet time. There are also sections of the videos where the stories are allowed to breathe more completely, without anything cut short for time. And if these threads have touched something tender in you and you would like to place a small tip in the jar to help keep the remembering going for others who need these stories too, that space is there as well. It feels like a circle of friends who believe that the gentle parts of history deserve to be held with the same care as the rest. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. The threads continue now in the listening. Each time someone hears these small moments and carries them forward, another stitch is added to the fabric that stretches between then and now. The young woman's garden lives again in the telling. The father's letter finds new ears. The corner of bread is still being offered, quietly, in the space between one story and the next. These are not the loud parts of history. They are the parts that ask us only to remember that people remained people, even when everything around them tried to say otherwise. And so we keep the threads close, not because they can change what happened, but because they remind us what was still possible in the middle of it all. A hand reaching for another in the dark. A voice humming when words felt too heavy. A memory of home held in the fingers long after home had been taken away. These things do not shout. They simply remain, soft and steady, waiting for anyone who wishes to hold them for a while. Thank you for holding them with me tonight. May the threads bring you a quiet sense of company, and may you carry a little of their gentleness into your own evening. There comes a moment, after the longest of nights, when the darkness begins to loosen its hold, not all at once, but like a hand slowly opening to let go of something it has held too tightly for too long. In the places where the night had lingered most deeply, where so many had been made to endure things that no body or spirit was meant to carry, the first hints of change arrived without announcement. They came in the form of a different kind of silence, one that did not press down but waited, almost respectfully, for those inside to notice it. A man lying on a thin mattress felt it first in the way his own breathing changed. For years, his breaths had been shallow, careful not to draw too much attention to the life still moving inside him. Now, without quite knowing why, he took a deeper one. It tasted of cold air and something else, something like the promise of space. He did not dare to hope yet. Hope had been tested too many times. But he allowed himself the small luxury of wondering what the air might feel like if it were allowed to move freely around him. Not far from him, a woman sat with her back against a wall that had seen too much. In her hand she held a single button, the last thing she had from the coat of a child she had loved before the long night swallowed everything. She had hidden it in the seam of her own worn clothing, checking its presence each evening like a secret prayer. The button was smooth from being turned over and over in her fingers during the quiet hours when fear tried to speak louder than memory. As the new silence settled, she held the button to her cheek for a moment, the way one might hold a cool cloth to a tired eye. It was not much, but it was hers, and in that ownership there was a quiet resilience that no force had been able to take. She thought, very softly, of the day she might show it to someone who would understand without needing the whole story. In her private fear, she had sometimes wondered if the button would be the only thing left of the life she had known. But on this morning, as the light began its slow approach, that fear felt a little smaller, like a shadow that had started to fade at the edges. In the spaces between these small private worlds, kindness moved like a hidden current. One person, whose own strength was nearly gone, noticed another whose hands were shaking from the cold that had settled into everything. Without a word, the first reached over and placed their own thin blanket across the second person's shoulders. It was not a grand gesture. There was no one to see it, no record to be kept. It was simply the act of one human being deciding that another should not face the remaining hours of night alone in the chill. The one who received the blanket did not speak either. They only pulled it closer and, in that pulling, passed a small nod of thanks that said more than words could have managed in that moment. These were the everyday heroisms that kept the darkness from winning completely. They happened in the margins, where no one was watching, and they were all the more powerful for it. The person who gave the blanket felt, in that giving, a small spark of their own warmth returning, as if by offering it they had reminded their own body how to hold on to life a little longer. When the dawn finally began to show itself, it did so with a shyness, as if it too had been through something and was not yet sure it was welcome. The light did not flood in. It seeped, slowly, through the gaps in the structures and across the open ground. With it came the careful sounds of people who had learned to move without startling the fragile peace that had taken root in the waiting. A soldier appeared at the edge of one gathering, his face tired but his eyes gentle. He carried no weapons in his hands at that moment, only a container of water and a quiet question in his expression. He approached the man who had taken the deeper breath earlier and offered the water. The man looked at the canteen for a long moment, as if making sure it was real. Then he reached for it, his fingers brushing the soldier's in the exchange. That touch, brief and ordinary, carried the weight of something that had been missing for too long, the recognition that one person could offer something to another without taking anything in return. The man drank slowly, savoring not just the water but the way the soldier waited, without impatience, for him to finish. In that waiting, the man felt seen not as a subject or a number, but as someone whose thirst mattered. Nearby, the woman with the button watched as another soldier helped a small group stand and begin the walk toward the open gate. One of the group stumbled, and before anyone else could move, the woman was there, her free hand steadying the person beside her. The button remained safe in her other palm, pressed against her skin like a talisman. In helping, she felt something shift inside her own chest, a loosening that had nothing to do with defenses and everything to do with choosing to be the one who steadied rather than the one who needed steadying. It was a small reversal, but in the economy of those days, it was a fortune. The person she helped looked at her with eyes that had seen too much, and in them she saw a reflection of her own quiet strength. They did not exchange names. They did not need to. The steadiness was enough. The walkout was not a march or a celebration. It was a slow procession of people learning how to place one foot in front of the other on ground that did not belong to the night anymore. Some leaned on others. Some carried what little they had saved. The woman kept the button in her pocket now, where it could rest against her leg as she moved, a reminder that she had brought something of her own through the long night. The man who had breathed deeper found himself walking beside the person who had shared the blanket earlier. They did not speak of what had been. Instead, one of them mentioned the way the light was changing the color of the distant trees, and the other agreed that it looked softer than they remembered. These were the first conversations of the dawn, made of ordinary observations that felt extraordinary simply because they could be spoken without fear of who might overhear. As they walked, the man thought about the letters he had composed in his mind over the years, words he had never been able to send. Now, perhaps, there would be paper and a way to let them travel. In the days and weeks that followed, as the survivors found places to rest and begin the long work of living again, many turned to the simplest of tools, pen and paper. Letters began to appear, written in careful script by hands that trembled at first from the unfamiliar weight of a pencil. A man wrote to a brother he had not seen since before the night began, describing not the tests or the measurements or the things that had been done in the name of a false science, but the way a single bird had landed on a windowsill that morning and stayed long enough to be watched. He wrote about the way the bird's feathers caught the light, how it seemed to have no hurry, as if it knew the world had changed and was taking its time to enjoy the new quiet. A woman wrote to a friend who might no longer be in the world, telling her about the taste of plain tea served in a cup that did not have to be guarded. She described the steam rising from the cup, how it curled like a gentle question in the air, and how she had answered it by sipping slowly, letting the warmth settle in her chest like a promise kept. These letters were not sent to wound or to demand. They were sent to reconnect the broken threads of ordinary life. Some found their way to the people they were meant for. Others became quiet records, tucked away in drawers or passed from hand to hand, carrying the small heroisms forward so that others might know they had existed. In writing them, the writers were practicing a form of quiet resilience, choosing to reach across the silence rather than letting it have the final word. Around the simple tables where food was shared without rationing or fear, stories began to surface like shy animals coming to drink at a stream. They were not the stories of the worst moments. Those stayed in the private places where only the heart could visit them safely. Instead, people spoke of the time someone had risked a small punishment to pass a message of encouragement to a person who had been taken for one of the tests. They spoke of the way a group had taken turns watching over the weakest among them so that everyone could rest a little, creating a circle of protection with nothing but their presence. They spoke of the quiet defiance of continuing to hum a song or remember a poem when everything else was being taken, turning the act of remembering into a small rebellion of the spirit. These tellings were acts of quiet resilience in themselves. By choosing what to remember out loud, the survivors were practicing the art of living beyond the night. They were proving, in the gentlest way possible, that the human spirit could still choose its own experiments in trust, in sharing, in finding beauty in a button or a bird or a steady hand. The stories grew longer as the days passed, and with each telling, the tellers stood a little taller, as if the words were helping to rebuild what had been measured and tested. It is in these choices that the true dawn lived. Not in the grand announcements or the official endings, but in the private decisions made when no one was keeping score. A person deciding to offer comfort instead of keeping it for themselves. A person deciding to write a letter even when the chances of reply were small. A person deciding to stand a little straighter because someone else needed the example. These were the everyday heroisms that turned the long night into something that could finally be left behind, not forgotten, but no longer the only story. The medical experiments that had been forced upon so many had tried to reduce people to numbers and reactions, but the small moments of kindness and the letters and the shared stories showed that there was always something that could not be reduced, something that waited for the dawn to show itself again. And much like the hidden kindnesses that moved through those final nights and first mornings, there were other hidden movements happening across the world during that time. There were secret plans and quiet missions, operations carried out in the shadows by people who could not speak of what they did, yet whose work helped to loosen the grip of the darkness in ways that would only become clear much later. These two were threads in the great weaving that brought the dawn closer for so many, working in the background like the unnoticed acts of care that had sustained the survivors. If sitting with these stories has stirred in you a desire to know more about the hidden parts of that history, the ones that worked quietly to protect and to heal and to turn the tide without fanfare, then I have something I would like to share with you. I have gathered together a free ebook titled The Shadow War, 5 Top Secret Operations That Shaped World War II. It explores some of those unseen efforts, told through the lens of the people involved and the quiet courage they carried, much like the quiet courage we've seen in the small moments of this long night turning to dawn. Along with it, the weekly newsletter offers gentle, in-depth looks at similar stories, ones that highlight the human threads of resilience and secret kindness that run through even the darkest chapters, helping us all remember that the dawn is built from such threads. To receive your free copy of the ebook and to begin receiving the weekly deep dives, all you need to do is follow the secure link I've placed in the description below. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. I offer this to you in the same spirit that the small kindnesses were offered then, freely, without expectation, and with the hope that it brings a little more light to your own evening. These stories, both the ones we've walked through tonight and the ones waiting in the ebook, are not meant to weigh us down. They are meant to remind us that even in the longest nights, there are always hands reaching out, letters being written, and quiet choices being made that help the dawn arrive, one gentle moment at a time. In sharing them, we keep the quiet resilience alive, passing it forward like the button that was held through the night, or the blanket that was given without a word. As you go about your day or settle into your night, may you carry with you the image of that first pale light finding its way across the earth, and the knowledge that the same light is still finding its way into the small spaces of our lives whenever we choose to offer a steady hand, a shared memory, or a simple act of care. Thank you for listening so openly and for holding space for these human stories. These histories belong to all of us, and the quiet resilience they reveal is something we can all practice, in our own ways, every day. Rest easy now, and know that the dawn continues to unfold, softly, around us all, inviting us to be part of its gentle work.